Release that which I by Ermo. Chapter 841, The Application of Blackwater. However, the underground Styx's River that where Blackwater converged in the southernmost region was very unusual. According to Iron Axe's report, along the way from Choke Swamp to Endless Cape, Styx's River became less thick and the stagnant fog turned thin. Several Styx's rivers intersected at Blackwater Valley where men could even hear the roar of the water splattering onto the rocks beneath them when they were standing at a higher spot. Roland speculated that the composition of the Styx's River water changed as it flowed. For example, the stagnant fog Iron Axe had described in his report might be a kind of toxic gas emitted by Blackwater, or a product of the reaction between some subterranean materials. That might explain the reason why during centuries of evolution, the natural lightning or man-made fire did not set the Blackwater Valley ablaze, and why no one could survive in Choke Swamp. The stagnant fog shrouding the Styx's River not only stopped the Sand Nation people but also blocked fresh air, and thus guaranteed a steady flow of Blackwater toward the south. But as the underground river drew close to the cape, it became thinner and finally disappeared. Only some part of the underground river would escape from the ground under pressure. Among them, some would set aflame, while some would turn into tiny streams and shallow puddles on the ground. Additionally, the stagnant fog dispersed at that point, providing a perfect environment for them to develop mines. Roland had no idea about how many components could be separated out of that unique crude oil, so he just asked the chief alchemist to have some experiments first before making a further plan. Luckily, the distilled components so far showed a very inspiring prospect. No doubt that Blackwater can be used to make dreadful weapons, but it can do far more than that, Roland answered as he picked up the beaker and studied it carefully. There's much we can benefit from it, even only from its high combustion heat. I'll let you know one day. The best way to motivate a straightforward man like the chief alchemist would be raising his interest with new knowledge. Roland laughed in silence as he saw the old man's desire was apparently not satisfied. He continued, as to the experiment, it's not enough to just use several retorts and condenser pipes if we mean to put Blackwater into use. You have to figure out some plans, like the way we produce dioic acids, that will enable mass production. The principle of oil separation was very simple, which could be regarded as the most basic chemical knowledge. Upon being heated, the raw oil would turn into steam that would later enter the connected distillation tower, where the steam of different components would successively condense due to their different boiling points. During this procedure, the finished oils such as gasoline, kerosene, diesel, heavy oil, etc. could be collected. The process was a complete physical transformation, so it would be very easy to achieve those materials under the current experiment condition. Although the utilization rate of the raw oil of the modern world had been significantly improved as the technology of refinement was diversifying, the traditional distillation was still useful. As such, distillation was still the first choice when they did not take the cost factor into account. Kausichi was too well aware of the difficulty they would face if they wanted to upscale any lab experiments to a more complicated mass industrial production. He had to take lots of details into account if they were going to put the distillation into practical production. The old alchemist stroked his beard and said, I need a few days to plan it out, and I want the Witch Union's assistance. That was a good sign that he asked for assistance from the witch voluntarily. Roland nodded. Just let me know if you want anything. I'll see to it. Thank you, Your Majesty, Kyle said, weighing his words. Apart from this, I have one more small request. Oh? Go ahead. May I have the honor to see the new invention made from them when it's ready? His voice was full of curiosity. Theoretically speaking, the old alchemist had gone a little overboard since the project was meant to remain confidential. It was just like an engineer responsible for extracting uranium or wanted to know the entire Manhattan Plan. But Roland agreed after a short contemplation. After all, a little incentive could raise his passion for work, and Roland was confident that there was nobody who could compete with Neverwinter in terms of science and technology level in this era. You have to work hard. Roland pointed at the separated liquids and said, the sooner you get the finished product, the earlier you will know the answer to your question. Pardon me, Your Majesty. Do you mean all of them? Kyle asked in amazement. They were indeed all combustible, but the liquid distilled in the lower tower was no better than snow powder. It produces thick smokes and doesn't burn well, not even good for lights. This guy, whose mind was still clinging to the explosive, takes any products that are less active as wastes, Roland thought. It was true that the light distillates in the upper tower were more inflammable and its flame was more vigorous, but their usages were unexpectedly limited in practice. Without additives, even the slightest mistake would set them off, so they were barely helpful under the current condition. Instead, he favored the diesel and heavy oil distilled in the lower tower. No doubt diesel would be a perfect fuel for the internal combustion engine. Even those mixed with impurities resulting from the inferior process were usable in practice. Their only problem was creating thick black smoke and thereby caused pollution when they burned, but that barely troubled Roland at this moment. Heavy oil would play an essential role in navigation and was the optimal fuel for steam-powered boats. The current coal-powered boat might work well in inland rivers, but it was not powerful enough to sail on the sea, where the boat required huge power that coal failed to provide. To be honest, it had already been a laborious task for the boat to travel from fjords to shallow beach of the western region. Therefore, Roland wanted to build Festive Harbor at the endless cape where he could supply oil to the steam-powered boat that was planning to cross the sea lane and enter the open ocean. Furthermore, the requirement of producing heavy oil was the lowest. The roughly distilled heavy oil, even those mixed with asphaltic residue, was usable, so it might be one that could be most easily obtained in the oil family. Of course, Roland would not tell Kyle about that. He could not guarantee anything before he got the finished oil. If the final result ran counter to his original deduction, it would taint his reputation for being omniscient. So he just shrugged and said, all the oil components, including the residues and scraps, must be collected and categorized. They'll be useful for me. Yes, Your Majesty, the chief alchemist said with his hand across his chest. By the way. As Roland walked out of the room, he suddenly stopped at the lab doorway. He turned to look at Kyle and added, set up a tutorial session. That took Kyle by surprise. He blurted out, what? I thought I'd made my idea clear in the last agriculture meeting. We need to add an agriculture class to our secondary education curriculum. That will help us to train enough qualified men to handle the situation even if when we are going to spread golden twos to the entire kingdom, Roland elaborated. And new plants will require more skilled people. As far as I can see, there are many people who intend to join the chemistry industry after finishing their universal education. You'd better have them trained before using them in case they mess everything up in the plant due to the lack of experience. Letting people choose courses they were interested in was the same as college students select their own majors. Here in Neverwinter, the process took place earlier in middle school. Roland had thought on this matter for a long time, and he believed that since there was no time to train people with various skills currently, he had better start with training professional workers as soon as possible. Your Majesty, wasn't Lady Scroll supposed to be responsible for that? She handles the sections of recruitment, class composition, evaluation, and payroll, but the teacher must be from Ministry of Chemical Industry, so you have to see to it. Kyle let out a sigh of relief as if he would have obeyed everything as long as Roland did not push him to teach students. His miserable memory was as fresh as yesterday. He had suffered enough during the process of recruiting and training some alchemy apprentices in order to earn intermediate chemistry from Roland. Kyle replied, I see, Your Majesty. I think the alchemists from the King's City, who were adept at public speaking and advertising, are quite qualified for the teaching position. Do you think so? Chapter 842, Chicken and Duck Night. Prius Dessau's life had been going quite smoothly recently. Like a dream, his service at the Elk family had faded into oblivion over time. His skill and training as a knight had been long forgotten. His big belly could not fit in his old clothes. Instead, he bought baggy fabric pants and short silk robes, which not only were easy to manage but also enabled him to act like a gentleman, although he was aware that in His Majesty's domain there were no real nobles anymore. Of course, his knighthood, which was not truly a dream, could still be evidenced by the shining armors displayed in his living room. Oddly enough, when he had been a knight of the elk family, he had disliked those armors so much that he had even considered selling them to a blacksmith at an unusually low rate. But after starting serving His Majesty, he began to feel these things pleasing to the eye. One of his hobbies now was holding his toddler and rambling about his valiant and heroic fighting stories. But in those stories, Prius had completely avoided mentioning Duke Ryan, as if he had always been an impeccable loyal minister to Roland Wimbledon. After joining the city hall, he had been continuously moving up in his career. Seizing the opportunity when the population of Neverwinter was rapidly growing, he expanded the chicken and duck aquaculture zone several times, and it now eventually turned it into a huge poultry factory. That was right, the poultry factory he created on his own was not by any means worse than the machine manufacturing factories. After learning the term factory from His Majesty, he immediately hung the board for his factory over the yard gate. Nowadays factories sprang out in Neverwinter like mushrooms after rain. It was currently the most popular word in the city hall. Naturally, he did not want to be left behind. After all, he had more than 100 employees. In his factory, there were almost 10,000 chickens and ducks which needed several baskets of fodders and earthworms each day, a scale he had never dreamed of. As to being called Chicken and Duck Knight, he did not mind it, instead, he rather enjoyed it. Now that his career was on track, Prius became idle. The first batch of apprentices had gained the skill of distinguishing poultry genders, feeding, filtering baby chickens, etc. Furthermore, they could even train newbies, which gave Prius much free time. Foul plague, the most dreadful thing for raising poultries, could be easily dispelled by that which Lily, so the scale of his factory could actually expand as large as he wished. Now, he only had to do planning and statistics work, and then the Minister of Agriculture would do the rest. In fact, most of the other knights who had been captured with him were doing pretty well, except a few who were too stubborn to cooperate. His superior Sirius Daly, for instance, a former knight of the Wolf family, had now become a minister, and he had the highest rank among all of them. Morning Light, who had been promoted to an intermediate teacher, earned about the same as Prius. While doing small talk, Ferlin Eltek seemed to have mentioned that he had plans other than keep on teaching. It was hard to speculate where this former star knight would work, but it must be somewhere not too bad. The other knights like Halon, Valsa, Kazan were either teaching or operating a business. Prius often met these old acquaintances when he had time, to chat about their daily lives, their work, and their expectations for the future. But not everybody was sincerely convinced by His Majesty. For example, Halon was not satisfied with the policy that forbade captured knights to join the army. As such, during their meetings, he was often in a state of despondence because of his unfulfilled dream. Prius did not agree with him. Everyone knew that flintlocks were very powerful weapons. If he were in charge, he would be unwilling to entrust these weapons to a defeated army. As to himself, he laid eyes on the annual award and honor ceremony. Judging from His Majesty's emphasis on agriculture, he felt sooner or later he would stand on the platform in the square, being admired and respected by audiences. Not only would he accept the medal bestowed by His Majesty personally, but he would also get a prize of 100 gold royals, which was a much promising future than joining the army. While he was on the way to City Hall, humming, and was about to greet Sirius Daly before going to the poultry factory, the minister stopped him. "Ah, here you are. His Majesty is waiting for you." Prius slowed down. "What's the matter?" "The guard didn't tell. He only told me to tell you to go to the castle when you're here." "I see." Prius pretended to be calm and self-collected, although his heart beat faster. It's not long after the conference of the agriculture mobilization movement. Is His Majesty thinking the same as I do, to promote me as an honorary example? Full of expectations, he entered the castle. Under the guidance of a guard, he came to His Majesty's office door on the 3rd floor. "Come in." After introducing himself, a familiar voice came from the other side of the door. "I've been waiting for you for quite a while." Officer of the Ministry of Agriculture, Prius Dessau sends his best regards. As soon as he entered the room, he got to his knee and held a fist over his chest as a knight greeted a king. But due to the extra fat on his belly, the gestures he made were far less handsome than before, and he almost trapped himself while kneeling down. "Please rise." The king was sitting behind a long desk, smiling at him, and said, "You've been doing such a good job recently that even Bhairav can't stop praising you, which is rather rare. Therefore, I have a new task for you. I'm at your command." Priya stood up respectfully. "Listen carefully. This is a top secret. Even in the city hall, not many people know it," Roland said in a serious tone, "and it's so significant that it concerns the future development of Neverwinter. As soon as you accept it, you can't tell anyone what you see and hear without my permission. The reason I chose you is that you're the most suitable candidate considering there's nobody else has done it before, although you're not indispensable. If you can do it well, the compensation won't be an issue. I want your answer now." Prius was startled. He did not expect His Majesty to make such a proposal at all. It had nothing to do with the medal, but His Majesty actually planned to give him a really tough task. Forget about the significance, the competitive compensation. They mean nothing but trouble. To be involved in the king's secret is like a suicide. Subconsciously, he wanted to decline it, but he swallowed the words on the tip of his tongue. "Wait a minute. Who do you think the person is?" "He is the Lord of Neverwinter, the King of Grey Castle." When the king wants an officer to do something, does he need to consult the officer in advance? Unless the officer has planned to rebel and hide in his territory. Otherwise, he should take the order no matter what it is so as to not suffer a king's wrath. His Majesty doesn't order me directly is to care for my feelings, not to give me the chance to refuse. Priya swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Even though this King Wimbledon is different from most other lords, and he means every word he says, didn't I just tell him I'm at your command? I just expressed my loyalty, then I directly tell him that I don't want to or I'm unable to do it? If I were the king, I guess I would hold a grudge if not flying into a rage on the spot. In that case, not only won't I get promoted, but I might not even be able to be a common official either, not to mention the award and honor ceremony and the abundant prize. At this thought, Prius really wanted to slap himself. After hesitating for quite a while, he eventually blurted out, "I'd like to take this task." He could not afford to lose his position. He had lost his identity as a knight, and if he went on losing his official position as the superintendent of the poultry factory, he would really have nothing left at all. At this moment, the only thing that comforted him was His Majesty's words, "You're the most suitable candidate considering there is no precedent." At least, this means a sort of confirmation of my capability? All right. Roland smiled and whispered something to the empty space beside him, and then looked at Prius and said, "Now follow me to a place." "Where?" Prius asked immediately, anxious and a little panic. "The third border city," the king said while raising his eyebrow. "Have you heard of it?" Chapter 843, The Conduct of a Loyal Official. Prius had never heard of this city. Border Town had become a place of residence because it was to serve the mine, and it had nothing to do with a city, let alone to prefix the city with the third. Before His Majesty arrived in the western region, only the Longsong stronghold deserved to be called a city. When they arrived at the cave at the foot of North Slope Mountain, Prius understood what His Majesty had meant. He had always been curious as to why the Ministry of Construction established a fortress-like building in Neverwinter. The location of a strategic point being guarded by the First Army was a bit strange. At its back was the North Slope Mountains, and to the left and right, there was too great a distance from the borders to defend against army invasions, let alone allow them to properly guard His Majesty's castle. He asked some of his colleagues in City Hall, but none of them gave him a satisfactory answer. Some said the construction team there was under the direct management of Minister Karl, and others had no authority to inquire into it. Such being the case, Prius stopped asking. After all, he was only curious. There was no need to go so far as to get himself into trouble. However, he never thought he would personally step into this military position. When Prius saw the man-made underground aisle and a large cluster of caves, his jaw almost dropped. How did they make this? 1 year ago, there was nothing in this area. Now, it's like the interior of the whole mountain has been connected. It's not exaggerating to call such a spacious underground area a city, but, could this have been done by men? Prius cast a furtive glance at His Majesty, to whom his awe deepened. Duke Ryan had indeed picked the wrong opponent. The lion overwhelmed the other big families and had ruled the western region for over a decade, and they made the once barren land as solid as a piece of iron. This was a manifestation of his perfect methods and capability, but, after all, he was just a human being. What happened next shocked the Elk Knight even more. As he arrived at a flat and open hall, by the trailer, Prius saw two men dressed like warriors walk over to them. Since the popularization of flintlocks in the First Army, guards dressed in this attire were rarely seen. One of them looked Prius up and down before he turned to ask His Majesty, "Are you sure it's going to be all right? Sooner or later, my subjects will know about it. Instead of concealing it, I think it's better to give them some time to accept it," Roland replied. "Let's start with the City Hall officials." "All right then," the guard sighed helplessly. He then waved towards the dome above the hall. A flash of black shadow descended and quietly fell in front of the crowd. Prius' heart pounded in his chest and he almost cried out. "Oh my God, what the hell is that?" Looking at the blob monster, full of tentacles, in front of him, he felt a chill as it crept up his spine. Even a demon from hell wouldn't look as horrible as that. The knight wanted to retreat but found that his feet had gone numb. The only reason he didn't fall to the ground was the calmness His Majesty exuded. Then he heard a voice. However, the soft female voice did not come from next to his ear, but from directly within his head. "Your Majesty, nice to see you." "Nice to see you too, Pasha," Roland said with a smile. "How are the worms?" "Their number has increased. As long as there are mushrooms, it seems they'll just keep on eating. They do seem easy to feed." "Yes, you can totally count on us. When the war starts, you won't have many hands to spare. Besides, I want to raise more than 1,000 worms, so it's better to let them get familiar with it sooner." Prius was startled. His Majesty talked so freely with the monster, just like he was talking with a common official. Not to mention the respect the monster showed towards His Majesty was totally different from the intimidating demons. If ghosts and monsters in books talked like this, perhaps they wouldn't be as scary. He took 2 deep breaths and he felt his racing heart slow down. "What does His Majesty want me to raise? Worms? Besides, is this the big secret he warned me about? At the foot of the North Slope mine is a concealed horrible non-human entity?" His Majesty seemed to read his mind. Patting Prius on the shoulder he said, "This is Miss Pasha. She used to be a well-renowned lady. Although she's been cursed by demons, which is why she looks the way she does now, deep in her heart she's still human. There's no need to be afraid." "La. Lady?" Prius was startled and took a moment to come to himself. "Exactly." The king sighed. "Come, walk with me and I'll tell you the details." That's when Prius heard an unbelievable story. There were more monsters like Pasha. 400 years ago, they lived in the barbarian land and even built their own towns, but they failed to resist the combined invasion of demonic beasts and demons. Most of them died in the wilderness, only very few escaped to the western region. The demon's curse turned them into monsters and made them immortal, which meant they had to live forever with that pain. Now, Roland took in those survivors. They would become Roland's ally for fighting against demons, as well as the subjects of Grey Castle. "I understand," Prius murmured. "But, as you can see, their looks can easily give people a negative first impression, so I have to keep it top secret and only very few have been told." Roland stopped for a while, his eyesight freezing. "If you speak of this, you know the consequence." "I'll keep my mouth shut, Your Majesty." Prius hurriedly swore. Although this odd news was more inconceivable than the horror stories from grannies' mouths, he did not intend to dispute how much was truthful. He would believe whatever His Majesty told him. That was the fundamental conduct of a loyal official. "Glad to hear that." His Majesty nodded. With the blob monster, no, the ancient Lord Pasha as their guide, the party passed through a long aisle. She then turned back and said, "Here we are." In front of Prius, there was another huge cave. The bleak underground space was suddenly full of movement. Despite the unprecedented plants and cavernous view, the huge worms crawling among the mushrooms alone were enough to keep his attention. Prius found that much stimulation, over a short period of time, had desensitized him. "Is this what I need to raise?" His Majesty seemed to have been observing Prius the entire time. Finally, he nodded with satisfaction before saying, "That's right. It's called a rubber worm. Its secretion is a widely used industrial material, which is as important as meat and eggs. The expedition team found it in the Great Snow Mountain and brought it back. Unfortunately, it could only live underground, which is why it has been left to the survivors from the third border city to take care of." At this point, Roland suddenly changed the subject. "I heard in order to feed the chickens and ducks, you raised earthworms?" "Essentially, yes." After quite some time, Prius finally caught up with His Majesty's thought. "I can reduce the poultry's foraging area, which will subsequently enable them to grow faster. These worms are no different than earthworms. I don't mean the breeding method, but the nature of the two." Roland kicked a rubber worm resting on a mushroom. The worm didn't move until it hit the ground, then, dragging its huge belly, it crawled off into the thick grass. "They're not aggressive, their favorite food is mushrooms. They are massive, but they are passive, so you won't be bitten. The only thing you need to do is regularly collect the mucus in their bellies." "Moo, cuz? Have you seen a milk cow?" "The point isn't the cow, but what the cow produces." "By collect, do you mean squeeze it out?" "It'd be best if you could find a way to harvest it." Roland smiled gently. "However, like I just said, the worm itself isn't important. Sometimes it's faster to kill the worm to collect the mucus. After all, their reproductive speed is much faster than a chicken or a cow." Prius suddenly shivered. For no clear reason he got the impression that His Majesty did not like the vital worms. As this thought flashed through his mind, in the blink of an eye, Roland returned to his usual tone. "Written in this notebook are some of the habits of these worms." He handed Prius a booklet, with a cowhide hardcover. "You can read it for reference and compare it to your knowledge. Then see if you can find ways to make them grow faster and collect mucus easier. I wish to see what you accomplish by next month." "Yes, Your Majesty." Prius swallowed hard and took the booklet, as he inquired, "How am I to do this on my own?" "The First Army stationed here will assist you," Roland said with a smile. "Work hard and there will be a place for you in this year's award and honor ceremony." Chapter 844, Messages arriving at the same time. The decision to have the Ministry of Agriculture farm rubber worms was not Roland's latest flight of fancy. In his opinion, farming rubber worms was as important as exploiting oil, so he naturally wanted to have that industry under his control. If it was not for the potential threats the worms might bring to people, he would not have any intention to place the feedlot in the third border city. After discussing with Berev, Edith, and other people, he decided to adopt the explanation of Her Ladyship and the Fallen City, which would be more acceptable to people than the saying of the Witch Empire. As now, only the City Hall's senior officials and the main force of the First Army knew the truth of the Battle of Divine Will and Tequila, so it was very difficult to make the upcoming war known to the world. However, they worried about a blunt announcement would make people panic, so they had to rephrase their proclamation before unveiling the truth to the public. A good way to do so was to slowly send the reworded information out to minimize subsequent shock created among the public. Roland would rather keep the dark history of the Witch Empire covered forever for the sake of the stability of the United Front. If humans were fortunate to win the Battle of Divine Will, it would be easier to make them accept that unique period of history by the time archaeologists unearthed the lost record. Night Elk was left alone in the wormhole to do the research on his own, while Roland, invited by Pasha, entered the subterranean hall. "They're back, Your Majesty." "Who?" Confused by the random words, Roland could not help raising his eyebrow. Pasha did not reply. She raised her tentacles and pointed at the deep, secluded passage on the other side of the hall, looking enigmatic. He looked over his shoulder at the dark passage where there was a flash of white shadow swinging by. Moments later, two giant devouring worms crept out and crawled towards him, wriggling, their mouths wide open, revealing tusks and fangs. "Your Majesty, do you remember us?" One of them greeted Roland merrily. Roland, slightly surprised, asked, "Are you Jasmine and Lyra?" How could Roland forget them? He could still remember the moment they had bade farewell and the calm look when they had said that they harbored no regrets before boarding the concrete boat heading to Great Snow Mountain. Even now, Roland could still feel their unfailing determination in their tones. "Yes, we are. You do remember us. Mind your manner." Another worm poked her companion with its tail. "Whatever we looked like, do remember we are the tequila worm?" Jasmine finished the sentence for Lyra deliberately. "Which?" Lyra cried. "They just arrived at Neverwinter. They persist in seeing you before their dormancy, so I have to keep them waiting beside the hall. I hope I didn't frighten you." Pasha drooped her main tentacles. "Thanks again for your assistance." "No, you didn't frighten me. Honestly, I've been waiting for the good news of the successful transfer too." Roland waved one hand and did not take it seriously. "Why, do they have to go dormant?" "For we couldn't afford to sustain the worm carrier, Your Majesty," Lyra said solemnly. "Fran alone is capable of handling the daily tunneling and transportation. There's no need to keep all three carriers awake. Even Fran was dormant for the most of her time before coming here." Roland remembered that Lyra had the same bright and bubbly personality as Jasmine's before her transfer. But now she gave him an impression of maturity, as if she really grew up instantly after the soul transfer. After staying with Phyllis and the other witches for a long time, Roland learned that not all tequila witches had lived a long life. At the very beginning, due to the lack of carriers and God's punishment warriors' shells, they were forced to merge with Eleanor, one of the three chiefs, or to be transferred to a soul container and enter a state of dormancy. In other words, only a few witches had lived for centuries. Most witches waited for a long time until the church was established in the Starfall city that could provide shells for them. Phyllis had changed 2 shells so far and had stayed awake for merely 150 years. The actual time when she was conscious was indeed shorter, as there was a period of time at the very beginning when she felt bewildered and had to adjust herself to the new environment. Still, she was regarded as the elder among the tequila survivors. Jasmine and Lyra were among the youngest transferer. Apart from the time they spent in getting familiar with their shells, they were often asleep. So, their mental age was close to their real age. Roland was really impressed with the change in their mentality. Moreover, the most estimable thing was that they still kept their spirits up even in the shells of devouring worms, which, as far as Roland could see, exceeded many people. Now it seemed that there was a good reason for the Union to unify the continent. Apart from its absolute power, they had many other merits worth noting as well. "If I intend to turn the impassable mountain range into a defensive barrier, 3 worm carriers aren't a lot," Roland said while looking at Pasha. "Keep them awake. They'll be very helpful to the upcoming new project. In addition, there are also many places in Neverwinter that need reconstruction. No need to worry about food. The city hall will take care of it." "Really?" Jasmine yelled excitedly. No one liked to spend most of their time sleeping, especially the tequila witches. They had slept too long. "As long as you don't ask for meat for every meal." Roland spread out his hands. "If they have Fran's stomach, I estimate they would just need the same amount of food as those for 100 people. Now that you've got a plan, I will leave them to you." Pasha, who seemed to have already known the answer, said with a smile. Roland felt more relaxed after the encounter with Jasmine and Lyra. As he returned to the castle, he received a message from the First Army. They had successfully accomplished the task to blow up the snow mountain. The passage that connected the underground river and the sea had been blocked completely by the explosion, and the rising water would head to the west after the ruins submerged. Most of the men would return to Neverwinter shortly except the gun battalion, who would stay at the snow mountain and monitor the change of the watercourse. Things had turned out as Roland had expected. As the tequila witches finished searching the underground ruins and gained the devouring worms, their exploration was approaching an end. Thus, there was nothing Roland needed to worry about as far as the western region was concerned for the time being. When Roland unsealed the other letter, the contents surprised him. It was from the northern region, not sent by a carrier pigeon but by a rider under Duke Kant's order entrusted by the garrison. With full 4 pages, it detailed what had happened in the holy city of Hermes and the collapse of the Tower of Babel. Eagle Face, the commander of the garrison, believed it was the perfect time to launch an attack. After taking the thick wall around the city and the huge mangonel into account, he asked for an reinforcement from 1 or 2 cannon teams. He wished to gain the first victory in the new year for his king. After Roland finished reading the letter, he could not believe that the church jointly built by the Union and Starfall City had come to its end like this. Roland could not help wondering whether this information was true or false. Doubtlessly, the church still had a number of God's punishment soldiers, and it might make a desperate attempt to save itself by involving the First Army in a street battle. Roland had planned to let the God's punishment witches participate in the battle to provide close-range attacks that the First Army was in lack of. In the meantime, the new mortar would be put into use as well to further drive enemies into a corner. Although it was advertised that the goal of the war was to unify the whole kingdom, the real purpose was actually to exterminate the church. But now came the signs that the holy city was fraying at the edges from inside. Just as he was about to summon people to have a discussion, he heard a tapping sound from the French window behind him. He turned around and saw Nightingale pull the bird directly through the glass into the room. Roland took the letter off the carrier pigeon's leg. The bird was apparently at a loss. When he spread the letter out and glanced at the content, he immediately stood up. How dare he? There was only one sentence on the paper. Appin, the King of Dawn, schemes to disturb the eastern region of Grey Castle. The situation in the Holy City is volatile. Otto Luashi has been imprisoned. Chapter 845, Eye of the Branch Nest. It hurts. It hurts a lot. I can't bear it. The monster beat its tentacles against the seawater in vexation. The blade and foot hiding inside its body were shivering, apparently frightened by the overwhelming anger. For the monster, pains were not unfamiliar. From the moment of its birth to the life as an eye of sectional nest, the monster had fought numerous battles against enemies. All that it had experienced, injuries, annexations, evolutions, and pains, enhanced and sharpened its senses. They were necessary sacrifices for absorbing magic power. But it was not the pain that annoyed the monster. It was a feeling that the monster had never had before. The monster tried to match the emotion with other reactions of life but soon found it unnecessary. The feeling lay in the instincts of most species. No matter how considerably the species varied, they all had, without an exception, this kind of feeling. Fear. A kind of feeling the monster had experienced for the first time of its life. The feeling somehow bewildered the monster, and the anger rose before it noticed it. Kill. Kill her. How very much I want to kill her. How dare her, a tiny bug, to break into my body and challenge me with the speck of magic power? One day I'll tear her to pieces and put her head on her skeleton, in a way red mist insects have done. Yet, neither anger nor fear was a necessary emotion that the monster had to experience in order to grow up. The monster had never been scared of pain, nor had it been upset by a momentary defeat. To be honest, it had never thought of such kind of thing before. The monster had thought of nothing except the evolution. Evolution was more important than mere survival, for the former represented the sublimation of the species, whereas the latter only stood for the interest of individuals. The monster realized that there was something wrong with its body. But what was it? Even thinking about the question gave it a serious headache. The hot flames had not only taken away 1/3 of its body but also made its head swimming. I need time. Time to regenerate a new body. And time to find the answer. The monster suppressed the fear, anger, and all sorts of various subtle feelings that it had never experienced before and sank to the bottom of the ocean. Over 10 days later, the monster crept out of the hiding place and released all the blades and feet locked within its body. The monster had suffered great losses in the battle, but it did not care much, for as long as it recovered completely, it would regenerate new parts of its body. Now the food was more urgent for the hungry monster. Meanwhile, it had come up with some conclusions to the problems. Firstly, the monster found that it had lost many pheromones that it had taken from various types of bugs before. The pheromones could help to indicate the evolution direction of its group, so collecting them was the chief task for every eye of the branch nest. The monster's loss was understandable. With a huge blast, the monster lost the control of its body in the hot flames and heat waves, its body parts twisted and broken, and among them, some were the brains that stored pheromones. Even though most parts of its body were healed, the pheromones in these brains were gone. This was like when you popped water bags. Repairing them would not help with the matter. That's not a big deal. There are bugs everywhere for me to recollect. And I've succeeded in keeping the most important red mist multi-eyed insect, so the loss is acceptable. But the problem is I've lost the connection with the mother of the nest. I can't believe it. Since the monster was born, its connection with its own kind was so close and inextricable that as long as they were in the same water area, it could always sense the central nest, no matter how far distance was laid between them. Through the water waves, it could deliver the collected pheromones, as well as share the evolution instructions among its kind. But now all of them were gone. The monster had scarcely concerned about this kind of problem since it got wounded. By the time its mind was clear enough to smoothly deliver the pheromone of the multi-eyed insect, it suddenly realized that where the indescribable feeling came from. It could not catch the voice of the central nest even when the tide fell and waters became one. At first, the monster wondered if the problem lay in its incomplete regenerated body. Then it thought of the fact that any individual separated from the central nest would never lose the connection as long as they were not utterly dead. The monster checked its body over and over again and finally noticed a part of its brain had blended with the red mist multi-eyed insect, rather than engulfed it. That tiny insect must have taken advantage of my fragile moment and had a desperate struggle. Aware of the truth, the monster was scared and angry at first but soon calmed down. In its eyes, a less evolved insect was merely a lesser creature, nothing more. The insect did not benefit much from its behavior even though it indeed made some difference. Now the monster could not sense even a little bit of the multi-eyed insect inside its body. Instead, it had taken over all its queer eyes, through which the monster could see many primal creatures looking at it. After a long thought, the monster finally found the answer to its problem. The reason why it could not reach the central nest lay in the merging, which involuntarily made it have some of the weird feelings of the insect. For example, fear. And anger. And egoism. Under the circumstances, the monster should have returned to Zenith C first and informed mother of the nest what had happened here. After that, it should hand itself over to the mother of the nest, for when the message could not be passed through water waves, annexation would be a perfect way for the group to retain all the pheromones and thereby obtain useful evolutionary instructions. Of course, the monster knew that evolution was more important than survival, a very basic understanding among the whole group. But now it hesitated. The monster found that it had pondered over more things in recent 10-odd days than what it had done in the past 100 years altogether. Back then, fighting, annexing, collecting, and growing were like its instincts, yet now it seemed to lose such instincts. In addition, the monster was aware that the restrictions on using pheromones were lifted. Every step of evolution was a choice made out of an abundance of caution. The pheromones collected by every nest must be passed to the central nest, where it would analyze them and then sort out the valuable parts that would be reconstructed and turned into evolution instructions. Evolution did not only involve the change in nest eyes but also involved every part of the group, from the central nest to blade and foot. All of them grew up in this way little by little. Therefore, there were not many differences between each eye of the branch nest. But during the time of recovery, the monster had accidentally used a pheromone coming from a primal creature with a self-healing ability. That was why its serious wound, which would have taken months to heal up, faded away so quickly within merely a dozen days. The monster also noticed something unusual about itself. It was no longer a usual nest eye. Its foot quickly hauled plenty of food, the primal aquatic creatures nearby, or what insects normally referred to as fish. The blade neatly cut off their heads, which then gave off a fishy smell that would soon attract more fish. In this way, it would not be long before the monster filled itself up. The monster did not know why those primal aquatic creatures, which enjoyed the same resource as them, still lived as the weakest among all. Somehow, as the monster watched the foolish fish gathered, it thought of itself. Since the monster had developed an emotion called fear, it no longer wanted to go back to Zenith Sea. The red mist insect's feelings had influenced the monster. It now realized that survival was more important than anything. The monster was afraid of being swallowed up by Mother of the Nest and being disturbed again by the erratic little bug. It also wanted a revenge. The anger was still there, but it hid it temporarily. As the monster continuously felt both anger and fear, it found itself yearn for more. This was something it had never considered before. Evolution would be the only way to get what it wanted. The monster hastily engulfs a pack of fish and then started to take action. The monster had never been so impatient before. Back then, every nest did the same job, and it did not matter whether the monster was quick or slow. But things had changed now. The pheromones the monster was going to collect and the evolution it would make had nothing to do with the group. This time, those tasks would be done for its own sake. Chapter 846, Factional Conflicts. Audiobook is our ally and he deserves better. They've harassed the eastern region this time, next time they may dare to cross the boundary and invade the kingdom. Brian said loudly. Your Majesty, please give the order. No matter how far the enemy is, the First Army will crush them for you. Invading us? Barav raised his eyebrow. If the army of the Kingdom of Dawn could enter Grey Castle so brazenly, why on earth would you be here? My lord, it's just an example. A baseless example won't convince anybody, Barav interrupted. More importantly, why do we need to involve the army in a problem that could be solved by diplomacy? Do you remember His Majesty's primary goal for this year? Do you think the eldest son of a noble family from the city of Glow would be more significant than our king's enthronement? For a moment, Brian was speechless. All right, let's take a break. Roland clapped his hands. Eat something before we continue. As the clapping sounded, a servant waiting at the doorway entered wheeling a trolley. Some officials in the hall started to help themselves to snacks while others went to the bathroom. Thus, the tension within the room subsided. This scene had come up repeatedly in their discussions during the 3-day meeting. After Roland had received the intelligence reports from the spy, Hill Fox, and the garrison in the northern region, he had summoned all of the relevant officials to the castle to plan out a solution to the current situation. Roland could clearly see 2 different factions forming among his men. The City Hall faction, headed by Barav, was more conservative. They preferred to concentrate on the development of the kingdom and were more focused on the western region, and they planned to gradually expand the population and increase the strength of Grey Castle until the unification of the kingdom. To make the King of Dawn, Apan Moya, pay the price for his action was in their plan, but it was not considered urgent. The other faction, consisting of the First Army under the leadership of Brian, favored by the advisor department, was more aggressive. But they were not as united and as close as the City Hall faction. The men of the First Army were influenced by Brian, who boasted of new concepts like defending against the enemy abroad, acting before the enemy even notices, and striking the enemy unprepared, so they insisted on taking immediate action, delivering retribution upon the Kingdom of Dawn and saving the detained Audiobook. As for the members of the advisor department, they probably chose to stand with the First Army for their own benefit as they had no way to earn themselves rewards unless there was a war to fight. Additionally, some members of the advisor department were from Longsong Stronghold, so they were not as familiar with Neverwinter as the men of City Hall. More often than not, their ideas were refuted and unappreciated, making their voice seem even less important. Hence, there were several times that Brian's speech was countered by Barav easily. Honestly, in terms of eloquence, Brian was far behind Barav, so he had already done a great job of expressing his ideas in front of the ministers in the meeting so far. After all, Brian, the leader of the gun battalion, was young. He grew up as an ordinary villager of border town, less tested and inexperienced, which was something that could be seen from his report of the defensive battle in the Snow Mountain. Roland had kept silent during the discussions. For the moment, the aggressive side was at a disadvantage and was losing control of the debate. To Roland's surprise, Barev's ability had grown greatly in the past 3 years. He might have been well trained while serving the previous treasurer, and all he needed was a chance to take off. The only thing that surprised Roland was that Edith had made no speech and kept silent over the 3 days of the meeting. Among the officials, she, the Pearl of the Northern Region, might be the only one qualified to argue with Barev. To prevent internal conflict between Edith and Barev, who both liked to compete against each other, Roland had deliberately set up a new department in City Hall, the Ministry of Defense, specializing in external military affairs. This new department included the Advisor Department as one of its subordinate organizations. The Ministry of Defense would be responsible for the external military affairs and the Security Bureau. In this way, the framework of Greycastle's brute strength was roughly finalized. As expected, Roland was the minister of this new department, just like he was for the other departments. Edith used to be Barev's assistant, learning to deal with affairs in the City Hall. She had done her job very well, but it was not until now that she got her formal approval and became a member of the new department. To be given such an honor so easily would be so great that no other reward would be a match in the future, and other newcomers would take her as an example, believing that they were also qualified to get such a title easily. After all, times had changed. Roland was no longer in a shortage of people and would not appoint anyone of little competence to a major position again. So, Edith now worked as a clerk in the Ministry of Defense, playing the role of an advisor to serve Roland. Roland believed that a person like the Pearl of the Northern Region would never feel frustrated at such an arrangement, which could give an impression that she had to start all over again to gain power, and that she would surely understand his intentions. Although she left the chief's office, she earned a chance to be promoted without interference. So, it was very unusual for her to keep quiet on an occasion that fit her skills and interests, and let Barev control the topic. Roland glanced at Edith, who looked relaxed as she enjoyed her chaos drink. It was as if Barev's imposing manner held no interest to her. What a strange woman, he thought to himself. He shrugged and said to Scroll beside him, "Show me today's meeting records." "Okay," Scroll said as she put down the quill and handed a notebook over. "Here's all the records." After 3 days of discussion, they had come up with a mutual conclusion to the information Roland had received. Hill Fox, who had sent back the secret messages, had placed the 3 pieces of news in order according to their importance. That meant the enemy harassing the eastern region required the most concern, and the thing about Otto in custody was less important. Given that, the meeting members believed that the eldest son of Luashi family was not, for the moment, in mortal danger. Apan Moya, who was new to his throne, still needed the support of the 3 big families. Even though Apan Moya wanted to replace the Luashi family, he needed time, and they thought he would need at least a year or 2. Otto might suffer in the prison, but he would survive. The news Roland got about the volatile situation in the Holy City was confirmed by the report from the garrison in the northern region, so the meeting members thought it must have been true. Now even the city of Glow started to stir. They thought that Moya family might also be aiming at the church. The Moya hated the church, and they were eager for the large amount of wealth in Hermes that the church had collected and saved for centuries. As for the harassment, the meeting members thought it might refer to secretly provoking and supporting the rebels. Other than that, the things the enemy could do, that was practical, was very little. No one believed that Apan would dare to march his army upon Grey Castle, for defeat was nearly guaranteed. But the rebellion truly happened within the domain of Grey Castle, which meant it could not be ignored. No matter how weak the rebels were, their action would cause damage to the kingdom, so it was reasonable for Hill to regard this piece of news as the most important. Chapter 847, Now is the Time. Both factions agreed to recover the eastern region and destroy the church, which had been incorporated into the plan in the previous meetings. The only thing still in dispute was when to retaliate against the Kingdom of Dawn. Roland had made his diplomatic posture very clear to his men, so this time no one tried to compromise on this matter or sweep the problem under the rug. But the officials of the city hall still wished to negotiate with the Dawn Crown after Roland's enthronement, for they believed that at that time King Roland would be more rightful to stand out for Grey Castle, and meanwhile they kept the choice of using force when it was needed. Apparently, they had been persuaded and tempted by the meeting held in the months of demons aiming at the future, so they were so eager to support Prince Roland to take the throne officially and become the veritable king of Grey Castle. They also wanted to ascend from the local officials to the ministers of a real kingdom. Lots of men and resources would be required to invade deep into the Kingdom of Dawn, which would doubtlessly affect the enthronement. No king would send out his elite men and hastily hold the ceremony of coronation at the same time. That was disgraceful either to the king or his people. Of course, it was Roland who had the final say. In the past 3 days, he had been watching the discussion without showing any obvious preference, which was a sharp contrast to the unyielding attitude he had shown in the letter he had sent to Appin. But thanks to his silence, the attendants finally got a chance to have as many arguments as they wanted. Roland did not change his original intention but was biding his time. He was waiting for an opportunity to profit the most while paying the smallest price. By nightfall, there came someone who knocked on Roland's door. He let out a slight sigh of relief as he saw the visitor was Andrea. Finally, she came. Had she not taken the initiative, Roland would have gone to visit her sooner or later, though he was sure that it was not a good choice and he might not be able to achieve anything by doing so. "Here, have a dried fish," Nightingale said as she showed up and gave a piece of honey fish to Andrea, who might be the only witch who could get a share of snacks from Nightingale with the exception of Wendy. Was it because of the bond among nobles? "Thank you," Andrea, who did not seem in the mood for snacks, said as she took the snack and pocketed it. She put her hand on her chest and saluted Roland. "Your Majesty, I..." She paused, finding the words. "You want me to save your childhood friend, Autoluashi, don't you?" Roland spoke out Andrea's thoughts. He could not allow Andrea to hesitate any longer. If she changed her mind, the 3 days Roland had spent waiting would be in vain. Roland also roughly guessed why Andrea could not make up her mind. He was certain that Otto was the one who fell in love with Andrea, who, on the contrary, only just took him as her friend. That was why she did not know how to make her request. To save Otto because he was her childhood playmate? After so many years, Andrea no longer missed her life in the Kingdom of Dawn because of what her father, Earl Quinn, had done to her. Her father did not protect her after he knew she was a witch. Instead, he used an accident to create a fake death for her. Of course, that was not something pleasant to remember. When Otto visited Neverwinter last winter, Andrea had clearly made known her attitude that she wished not to be involved in her life in the Kingdom of Dawn. She now came to Roland just because of her kindness and her wish to offer some help. Yes, she drew a deep breath and nodded slowly. But as you've heard in the meeting, at least over 3,000 men are needed to make Appin yield, plus the men that were required to attack the Holy City. The total number will reach about 5,000, which accounts for 80% of the First Army. Regardless of the argument, the City Hall and Advisor departments finalized a rough plan. There was no river connecting Grey Castle and the other 2 pieces of land, Hermes Plateau and the Kingdom of Dawn. Under such circumstances, they had to rely on carts and men to transport supplies, which significantly increased the number of the men engaged in the logistics team. In addition, 20% of the First Army must be left to garrison every region of the kingdom, so they had to leave for the next battlefield right after they won the first battle. The First Army did not even have extra men to take care of the land they had just conquered. By taking every aspect into account, it turned out that they would be busy all around without making a profit, or even worse. I just counted the manpower. If you put in the materials, all kinds of cost, like the money for horses, carts, food. Watching Andrea becoming more embarrassed, Roland attempted to illustrate more facts to make her suffer, but all of a sudden, he paused. "Your Majesty?" The blonde witch in front of him was slightly surprised. Roland's abrupt stop was not because he noticed something wrong, but because Nightingale had pinched him hard on his back and then whispered to him in a voice that no one else could hear, "Stop pushing her. Can't you just say what you mean?" "Ahem. I'm all right." Roland coughed. "That's the situation now, but we can turn the tables with some effort. It just depends on the three families and to what extent they are willing to cooperate." "The three families?" "It's obvious that the new king no longer trusts them. Our action may succeed in saving Otto, but our direct interference will break the relationship between the Moya royalties and Luashi family. Even if Appin is overthrown, how could the next king forget this?" Roland touched his chin and went on, "Now I've got strong demons to fight against, so I can't put too much concentration and men into our neighbor country. The future of the Kingdom of Dawn depends on the three families." Andrea seemed to realize something. She said, "Please go on." "We need someone to replace the Moya royalty," Roland said word by word. Andrea was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I see. Do you have a plan?" She was a true highborn girl, who could keep calm even in the face of scheming to overthrow a regime. That made the next talk so much easier. Roland went straight to the point and asked, "Are you interested in being the Queen of the Kingdom of Dawn?" "Your Majesty?" Andrea's face finally changed. The question indeed took her by surprise. "No. I don't want to leave." "Why not?" She bit her lip and said, "No reason, I'm just not interested." That was something Roland had not expected, not her answer of not wanting to be the Queen of Dawn, but her expression. She was clearly swayed by the considerations of gain and loss, which was something rarely seen with Andrea, whose manner was usually so elegant. Was there something more precious to her than being a queen? Roland sipped his tea, his face emotionless. Luckily, he had a second plan. "How about your father? Is he interested? Will he stand out?" The Quinn family was his best choice. In addition to its superior strength among the three families, Andrea, who was loved by Otto and Oro, also played a key role. To some extent, she could speak for the three families. The people that graduated from Neverwinter's current education system were not enough to run Grey Castle, so there was no way for Roland to put men in place to fully control the Kingdom of Dawn. It would be easier to support a regime that was friendly to Grey Castle, and if Andrea gave her approval of the plan, he would be able to get the neighbors' resources at a low price. Of course, the other two families will also benefit. In fact, the coup will make every participant win, and more than that, the threat that hangs over your heads will be completely lifted, Roland said slowly. In this way, Neverwinter will save the trouble of marching army and investing coins, and all I need to do was to assist the Quinn family in taking the throne. Andrea did not hesitate for long this time. After a moment of thought, she gave her promise. "I think my father will agree." She paused and corrected herself, "No, he'll definitely agree." When Andrea gave those words, Roland knew that she had fully understood what he meant. Now was the time. Neverwinter will soon take action. Don't worry. Otto Luashi won't be detained for too long. Chapter 848, Mission Pure Witch. "I thought you wanted to be the King of Dawn yourself." Nightingale twisted her lips and spoke after Andrea had departed. "Turns out you weren't joking about making her the monarch." "I knew you would figure it out soon." Roland shrugged. As for myself, several explanations had run through his head, including the lack of able personnel, Andrea's communicative abilities, as well as the constraints on time and resource. Instead, he settled for a simple line. "I'm just not capable enough." "Really?" Nightingale patted him on the shoulder. "I'm sure you can count on Andrea. You can't go wrong with the Quinn family. These two certainly appreciate each other a lot." Roland began to laugh within. However, as Nightingale had been a dependent of a family in the past, her political foresight was a level below his own. He personally believed that family background was not a factor, as long as Andrea was not blindly devoted to it. He was certain that she, like most people, would gladly accept and cherish a glorious opportunity like this which did not come at much cost. But he kept these thoughts to himself, for it was much too adorable to see Nightingale speak nonsense in the most serious of manners. Just at this moment, someone knocked on the office door. "Come in." The door creaked open, and the person standing outside turned out to be Isabella. Roland had not expected this. The latter was not a member of the witch union and hence could not access the castle district under normal circumstances. However, once he saw Agatha's figure behind her, he understood how she was able to get through. "Your Majesty." The pure witch, formerly of the church, bowed and quickly got to the point. "I've heard from Agatha that the Church of Hermes is on the brink of collapse, is that so?" If it was not for the mildly grim look on her face, Roland might even have mistaken that she was here to plead on behalf of her former overseers. "That's what the intelligence says, but we're still finding out the specific details." Roland was puzzled as to why the ice which had revealed this information to the latter, but instead of denying the matter outright, he replied as vaguely as he could. "Refugees from the church have begun to appear in Coldwind Ridge and the western part of Kingdom of Dawn. They've testified that the most popular cathedral in the Holy City has collapsed overnight. Your Majesty, I hope that you can send troops to Hermes as quickly as possible." "Why? Don't you remember what I'd mentioned? The millions of berserk pills there." Isabella replied in a disgruntled voice. "There's bound to be some people who now know where they're stored. If word gets out, your plans will be disrupted." She paused before continuing, "This stuff will be highly useful for the Battle of Divine Will. Best if you can collect and transport all of it back to Neverwinter." It was only now that Roland remembered the latter had mentioned this in the intelligence she had provided. It seemed that Zero's plan was to unite all of mankind in a life-and-death battle against the army of demons, and her trump card was indeed to be these berserk pills. As he was personally contemptuous of these drugs, he had almost forgotten about the matter. However, the situation had changed greatly. Isabella was right. If someone distributed the pills, such that they fell into the hands of nobles from Greycastle, the Kingdom of Dawn, or worse, the rats of Blackstreet, there would be considerable trouble. Perhaps, they would still not be able to take on a fully equipped army, but individual officials and regional governments would certainly be under threat. "Where are the pills stored?" He glanced at Isabella. "They're separately stored in hidden warehouses all over the Hermes Plateau. It's hard to explain where they are exactly." The latter hesitated for a moment before she continued, "If your Majesty trusts me, allow me to follow the army there. I was once the Pope's ordained executor, and with this identity, I may be able to slow down the internal collapse. Otherwise, the army will find it difficult to stem the flow of refugees." "But who'll know if you use your identity to do other things?" Nightingale interjected. "Perhaps you'll secretly release those believers. You have friends among them, haven't you?" "I wouldn't lie to His Majesty," Isabella refuted. "Zero has already shown up who's the real God's pet. I've no need to do such useless things. If necessary, the army can lay a trap for me to lead the believers into and kill them off. That's another way of maintaining order, aside from making use of my identity, as I mentioned." "Ugh," Nightingale rasped and spat out a mouthful. "I guess that's something a pure witch would think of." Roland felt somewhat disconcerted. It was not often that Nightingale would be at a loss for words, which was a sign that the latter was being serious about her suggestion. Though she had committed her full allegiance to him the other day, this was done on the basis of fighting the demons. Unlike most other witches, she had been educated and trained as a pure witch, which meant she had long been taught that the lives of normal people were unimportant as long as she could accomplish her objectives. After pondering for a short while, Roland slowly opened his mouth and spoke. "I'll allow you to travel with the First Army, but you shan't intervene in any battle. All you have to do is to find the pills and destroy them on the spot." "Your Majesty." Her brows visibly furrowed. "These drugs may overwork the body, but when it comes to a life-and-death battle—" "Say no more." Roland cut her short. "And speaking of maintaining order, I've another task for you." Isabella immediately lowered her head and responded, "As your Majesty commands." "There should still be a few cloisters left in the old holy city, right?" "Yes, but there are no witches left." After some contemplation, she amended her words. Perhaps a few awakened witches may have appeared during the last months of demons, but there's only a slim chance that they're still alive. That doesn't matter. Free the orphans, take care of them, and bring them back to Western Region. Isabella was taken aback. All of them? Yes. You shall be in charge. Roland nodded. Supposing that pure witches truly disregarded the lives of others in order to complete their missions, Roland wanted to see what Isabella would do when her task was to save lives. Though he might not be able to change what she had done in the past, he hoped that she would be able to rectify her ways. This task has its purpose, which I must thank you very much for reminding me about. That is, if the upper hierarchy loses the ability to maintain order, the cloisters are likely to turn into living hells. Right now, Neverwinter requires a large amount of labor, and there'll also be jobs for women. I'd heard that the church had started basic education for the orphans, no? I'm sure they're all of excellent potential, and shouldn't be left to starve to death behind those high walls. I want you to bring all of them here without exception. Isabella remained silent for a long while before she noted, that'll require a lot of food. I'll have people to prepare all the food that's required. An intricate expression appeared in her eyes. Roland had seen it before on the day she was pardoned, her chains were removed, and she was granted limited freedom status. If her thoughts could be heard, they would certainly comprise of a loud why. She slowly bent her waist and bowed. As your majesty commands. Chapter 849, The King's Orders. When Edith returned to her abode, she took off her coat and casually tossed it on the hanger at the door. She could not help taking in a deep breath of the rich fragrance which pervaded from the living room, and her dry mouth welled up with saliva at once. She had not felt any hungry during the meeting at the Ministry of Defense, but she now realized that her stomach was growling terribly. Why so late today? Cole's voice was heard before he stuck his head out from behind a doorframe, visibly holding a spoon in his hand. The war will start any time now, and naturally, the Ministry of Defense has more work to do. In particular, the circumstances of the Kingdom of Dawn are making things more complicated. She took off her leather boots and replaced them with a soft pair of socks before she entered the living room. If I return late next time, you should go ahead with dinner. Nah, I'm fine with this. Cole twitched his lips. But, isn't it that His Majesty has yet to decide what to do regarding the King of Dawn? If he employs the strategy offered by Barev's side, won't the plans you're making now be a complete waste? Do you really think he doesn't have his own ideas? Edith patted her younger brother on the head as she walked past him. Roland Wimbledon isn't the sort of king who blindly goes by his subordinates' ideas. What be you found out this time? Cole put on a curious look. I can tell you, but then I may have to kill you. She swept a glance at him which caused him to quiver and not speak another word. On the dining table were placed 2 dishes and a soup, all of which the main ingredient was Neverwinter's specialty, birdbeak mushrooms. Recently, either because there was a growing number of hunters who gathered these mushrooms, or because a new source had been discovered, a large supply of mushrooms which were exceptionally fresh, delicious, and juicy was being sold in the convenience market, and at a lower price than before. As such, the sale of these mushrooms was on the verge of surpassing that of meat products. It was a pity that the plump feature of the mushrooms was difficult to preserve for long, or otherwise they would sell excellently outside of the Western region as well. Edith placed a grilled mushroom in her mouth. The slightly burnt flavor of the mushroom cap blended together perfectly with the melted butter, and after a satisfying crisp sound, she felt her entire mouth filled with mushroom juice, causing her to croon in delight. She realized she had belittled her dear younger brother all this time. Although he was not good with the sword and possessed an indecisive character, his talent for learning was far greater than what she had expected. Take cooking for instance, he had learned how to prepare these mushrooms simply by eating them once or twice at banquets organized by His Majesty, yet the taste was almost identical. This would not be possible without an ingenious mind. It also applied to his clerical work at the City Hall. He had been on the job for merely a few months, but had already served as the official scribe at important meetings held at the Lord's Castle. This speed of promotion far exceeded that of people of the same age group as him. Even the bunch of young nobles from the northern region, who considered themselves to be peerless in their excellence, might not have been able to do better than him. Of course, what Edith appreciated most was that he always listened to and obeyed what she said. As she thought about this, she felt the dinner taste more delicious than ever. After all, the greater the ability of the people under her charge, the easier it would be for her to get certain things done. Sis, halfway through the meal, Cole could not resist speaking up once again. Why have you stayed silent for the past few meetings? She placed her spoon down and visibly raised her eyebrows. The questions which His Majesty asked were all within the realm of your expertise, no? Since you were able to read his intentions, why didn't you speak up for him? Cole grouched. Did you not see the way Barab was looking at you? He was nearly bursting with delight. This is also a secret. According to conventional practice. Ugh, he lowered his head and revealed a distressed look. After much hesitation, he shook his head abjectly as if to suppress his inner curiosity. But, on account of this delicious dinner, I'll take it that you've paid up. Edith began to smile slightly. How much do you know about Andrea of the Witch Union? Andrea? Cole thought for a short while. Her name has never appeared on any scheduled plan, and her ability is meh. Her ability is irrelevant. The Pearl of the Northern region snapped. It's normal that you don't know much about her. She's a combat witch, and rarely shows up in public. Only a few people know of her background. From what I've gathered, she's a noble from the Kingdom of Dawn, and her family's a highly honorable one. She's also an old friend of Audiobook. You can more or less infer the rest of the secret from these details. Subsequently, she provided a simple outline of her own speculation. Do you now understand why I didn't speak up during the meetings? Had I revealed the favoritism involved, some things that could be achieved would no longer be possible. His Majesty might even have held me responsible. Cole's eyes widened. How did you know all this? Did you really believe I offered to go to the Great Snow Mountain simply to back up what I'd said, that only people who've served on the front line should be eligible to become key officials? That's only one of several reasons. She shrugged her shoulders and continued, had I not made this trip, it would be difficult to make close contact with the witches. Cole strained his brows and contemplated for a long while. No, that's not right. Granted that the news you'd heard was accurate, how could you be so certain that His Majesty would choose Andrea as a quick fix for the problems in the Kingdom of Dawn? There's absolutely no relation between these points. Couldn't he have made it a priority to recapture the kingdom and organize an ascension ceremony? There's certainly no necessary relation. However, His Majesty's behavior during the meetings makes it hard for me to believe otherwise, Edith responded assertively. During 3 days of meetings, he'd glanced at Andrea a total of 17 times. She's neither a city hall official, nor a key decision-maker, and as such, unless they're having an affair, this should be the secret plot. You even noted this? She raised her bowl of soup and reenacted her posture during the meetings. By sitting like this, I can observe His Majesty with the corners of my eyes. He certainly wouldn't expect that while he was watching Andrea, someone else was constantly observing him. The younger brother puckered his lips into a peculiar expression and muttered something inaudible. What did you say? Edith questioned icily. No, nothing much. Cole hastily waved his hands in denial. But I would like to ask, when you spoke to Andrea after one of the meetings, was it also because of this? What if your guess was wrong? Oh? She arched an eyebrow in amusement. You saw that? I wanted to ask you what time you would return home that day. But, you seemed to remain in front of her for only a very short while. I didn't need to divulge all of the conjectures in my head. Because it's a matter of favoritism, all I had to do was to give her a gentle nudge on the back, Edith calmly replied. I simply said to her, His Majesty is a very benevolent king, and besides, he has met Sir Otto briefly before. As long as you speak up, he'll almost certainly agree to save the latter. This way, if my guess was correct, I would have served to help His Majesty, while if I was wrong, she paused briefly before finishing her sentence, who actually cares if the Kingdom of Dawn's nobles are dead or alive? The next day, the routine meeting lasted for only half its usual duration. Roland Wimbledon, who had been quiet for the past 3 days, figured that he had heard enough of the minister's discussion, and therefore announced his decision at the start of the meeting. In Neverwinter, the First Army would split up into 2 routes. The first route would be to enter Hermes Plateau through Coldwind Ridge, while the second would be to cut through the eastern region directly towards the border of the Kingdom of Dawn. The aim was for these 2 offensives to link up in the City of Glow by early autumn. After Roland had issued his decree, everyone at the meeting discontinued their arguments and acknowledged his orders in unison. Even Berev, who was the leader of a group which held a more conservative opinion, bowed in agreement as though he had not said what he did previously. The entire western region became busy in the blink of an eye. Chapter 850, A Lone Wolf. 1, 2, 3, 4. Lorgar dumped the gold royals out from her bag on the table and carefully counted them twice, her brows tightly knitted together. There were only 21 of them. In less than half a month, she had used up 3/4 of her savings. She was certain that if she continued to live this way, she would have to flee back to her home in disgrace, dumping all her pride and lofty aspirations into quicksand. The prices in a big city are so high, particularly in Evelyn's complex winehouse. The drinks are outrageously expensive. It's like an open robbery. No, Lorgar whimpered as she lowered her head in dejection, her ears dropping as well. She had to admit that the wine shop had never robbed her and she had willingly taken out her gold royals to buy the drinks. In fact, the shop owner had even expressed worries for her many times when she had spent lots of money there. The owner had also told her that after joining the Witch Union, she would have been able to get 1 bottle for free each month. However, what the owner said failed to register in her brain. I was defeated by my own desire. Or by my curiosity. But it's not my fault. Those chaos drinks are so enchanting. Even the morning dew of Arturo Oasis doesn't taste that good. Their amazing flavors are beyond description and each one of the colorful drinks is unique and tasty. Complex Winehouse does deserve its reputation. If all the winehouse drinks had the same flavor, even if they were as tasty as the Three Gods brew, Lorgar was confident that she could control herself. After all, she knew that drinking a proper amount of wine would do good to a warrior, but drinking too much would be destructive. However, chaos drinks were too unpredictable. She just couldn't wait to try another flavor and had unconsciously spent her money like running water. Feeling frustrated, Lorgar moved her head from side to side, rubbing her forehead against the cold table, trying to clear her head. No, I must stop indulging myself. She had been intrigued by the winehouse in the city. She found that the place that sold horrendously expensive drinks also turned out to be a really good spot to broaden her horizon and collect information. Sitting anywhere inside the winehouse, she could overhear conversations of merchants coming from all over the northern kingdoms. Unlike the traveling traders in the southernmost region, most merchants here were wealthy and able to give insightful comments on the things that the wolf girl had never heard before. She had benefited a lot from hearing these talks. She could also meet some of the witches here, through whom she could also learn some inside information about the Witch Union. Unfortunately, her remaining money could hardly support her plan to stay in the city to wait for those kinds of opportunities. She had to take action now. To overcome her desire for the drinks, she was going to find someone to fight and she had better leave the city to do so. This way, she would be able to stay away from Neverwinter's complex winehouse and forget everything during combat. When the wolf girl closed her eyes, the sand road arose in her mind. Yes, that's it. This must be a challenge the Three Gods give me. She cheered up at the thought. She patted her own cheeks to refresh herself, put all the gold royals back in her bag, and started to pack her belongings. She had not wasted the entire half-month in the complex winehouse. Ashes had introduced her to her lifesaver, Miss Nana Pine, and now she knew that Nana, Lily, and Leaf were the 3 witches who had a curing ability in Neverwinter. She was happy to find that they did not just serve the great chief. These 3 witches ran a hospital in the city and all the residents here could pay to get their treatments which were much cheaper than chaos drinks. Under such circumstances, the wolf girl was able to get medical care whenever she needed, even if she did not work for the great chief. This was better than what she had expected. Among the three witches, Ms. Nana had the strongest healing power, but it only worked directly on the patient. Fortunately, Lily and Leaf could create magic medicines, such as this bottle of grey powder in Lorger's hand, which was called special medicine for metal-infected wounds. It was made by Miss Leaf and could rapidly stop bleeding. Another bottle of liquid medicine named cleansing water was produced by Lily. It looked like ordinary water from wells but was able to resist infections. Lorger thought its effect did match its name. When a warrior's wound was exposed, infection was even more fatal than blood loss and pain. This common knowledge made Lorger quickly recognize the value of this potion. If it did not have a shelf life, she would definitely buy all the purification potions she could find. She could buy both of these medicines at the hospital. Given their effects, she thought their prices were not high at all. They were undoubtedly the best safeguard for any warrior who wanted to challenge their limits and fight strong opponents. She was confident that she could defeat any strong enemy as long as she could use these medicines properly. The other things in her plan had not gone as smooth. Firstly, all the tricks she had prepared to explore the Northern Kingdom had turned out to be useless since Neverwinter had no rats association that the traveling traders had mentioned to her. Secondly, the residents here seemed to know nothing about demons. She had asked several dozens of people but had still failed to get any clue. Instead, she had aroused suspicion and even been followed by some men in black. By now, she had only known demons from Ash's descriptions and a conversation she had overheard in Complex Winehouse. They had once appeared in an abandoned city in the wilderness to the north of Neverwinter. According to her past experiences, she should not take initiative to attack an opponent whom she knew so little about. However, she still urged herself to action, since she was eager to get rid of the Chaos Drink's temptation and prove herself to the great chief. She thought that since this journey was a challenge, it would inevitably be filled with obstacles and setbacks. She was well prepared in her heart. Outside the city of Neverwinter, she found an uninhabited dense forest. She took off her clothes and transformed into the big wolf, darting toward the north with her pack held in her mouth. She did not know the specific location of the abandoned city or when she would be able to meet a demon, but she had enough patience. As a desert wolf who had acute hearing and smell, she believed that she could easily live for a long time in this wilderness, which was a dangerous place for an ordinary person. This ability had enabled her to discover and kill hidden enemies again and again back in the southernmost region. She was confident that she would be able to copy her success again. Stepping on the soil mixed with melting snow, she somehow felt that the three gods would lead her to meet the real enemy. She did not run very far before she heard a sudden whistling sound in the air. It sounded as if something was rapidly crackling through the air. She knew that someone was swooping down toward her. This familiar sound alerted the wolf girl. In the holy duel on the burning stage, the four-winged eagle had launched a surprise attack at her with this method. She had not been able to dodge such a quick blow at the time, but now she had enough experience to deal with it. As an excellent Majin warrior, she would never allow herself to be hit twice by the same kind of attack. Lorger balanced on one leg while turning her whole body to the side, planning to meet the coming attacker head-on. She held the ground tightly with her sturdy hind legs, tensed her muscles, and opened her claws, ready to ferociously counterattack when the enemy landed. In the next moment, she saw a big monster hit the ground where she had been, splashing a lot of snow water into the air. Its wings were even broader than those of the four-winged eagle. When it landed, the ground seemed to tremble. Meanwhile, she heard it whine as if it was greatly surprised by the fact that it missed its target. Coup? Chapter 851, An Invitation from the Neverwinter Exploration Group. Lorger found that this wild, ugly flying monster who had hairless wings and terrifying strength sounded somewhat familiar. Wait, doesn't it sound like the white pigeon who's very close to Ashes? The wolf girl thought. A fierce image of the bird she had imagined flashed across her mind again. Maggie? The name slipped out of her mouth before she realized. The wolf can actually speak, Coup. The monster gave out a strange cry and hurriedly retreated many steps with its eyes widely open. Seeing this, the wolf girl froze in the place, unable to decide whether she should spring at it. She did not know why Maggie launched this sneak attack at her but still thought this incident was a good opportunity to challenge Maggie. However, the panicked monster's actions made her think that Maggie was the one being ambushed. "It's a witch, idiot." A crisp, immature voice suddenly came from the monster's head. "Who are you? How do you know us?" Lorgar looked up. She had to slightly narrow her eyes to look hard and found another witch floating in the air with the sun behind her. In the glaring sunshine, the wolf girl could only vaguely see her short blonde hair flying in the wind and a weapon reflecting silver light in her hand. Lorgar was surprised that this little girl seemed to have a lot of fighting experience. This technique of using dazzling sunlight to hurt an opponent's eyes was not very easy to master. Knowing that these witches did not come to challenge her, Lorgar let herself relax. She liked challenges, but she did not want to pester her opponents. Besides, she still remembered what Ashes had said about Maggie: all the people who challenged her could not get rid of bad luck. With this in mind, she decided to avoid this trouble when she was strengthening her fighting capacity alone. She dropped the pack that was in her mouth and transformed back into her human form. "I'm Lorgar Burnflame from the desert. I came here with Ashes and Andrea. Ashes mentioned you on the way, Maggie." "Ah, I remember." The big monster shrank in the blink of an eye and turned into a little girl whose height was only up to her waist but had long white hair almost touching the ground. "I've met her when I went to pick up Ashes." "Coo. Didn't Ashes tell you anything about me?" The blonde little girl grumbled. "You're Lightning, the greatest explorer in the western region, no, in the entire kingdom of Grey Castle." With these words, she plunged down and landed in front of the wolf girl. "You've got to remember it." "Coo, why did you take off your clothes?" Maggie curiously looked at the wolf girl's chest and then touched her own. "Is that something you can conjure up?" "Coo." Lightning gave Maggie a knock on the head. "Stop staring at her. That's just individual differences." Lorgar put on her coat. "So why did you attack me?" Lightning stopped being so confident and seemed even a little embarrassed. "I thought you were a mutated snowwolf. It's our job to keep watch on the northeast, eliminate wandering demonic beasts in the barbarian land, and bring fresh prey back to the castle. And stealing birds' eggs from their nests, picking honeycombs, and roasting food in the wilderness. Those aren't our work." Lightning instantly interrupted Maggie. "In short, there's almost no one in this area, plus the months of demons just ended, so." "I see." Lorgar nodded. She accepted this explanation since she had repeatedly heard that the border regions of northern kingdoms would become very dangerous during months of demons every year. After the fight against the four-winged eagle, Ashes had also told her many things about hybrid demonic beasts. It was sensible that these witches up in the sky had mistaken the big desert wolf she had transformed into as a wolf demonic hybrid. "What about you?" the little girl asked. "This is the barbarian land. Many demonic beasts wander this place and something even more terrible may also hide here." "What do you want to do out here alone?" "Something more terrible." "Do you mean demons?" Lorgar calmly said. "If so, I think I've come to the right place." "You know about the demons?" "Coo. I'm looking for an abandoned city. I heard the demons have appeared there." She paused for a moment. "I want to hunt them." Lightning was stunned for a moment and then looked at Lorgar with a strange facial expression as if she was trying hard to stop herself from laughing out. "Who told you that? Is there anything wrong?" Lorgar asked. "Demons did appear in Tequila, but it was over 400 years ago." Lightning grinned. "Of course, they may return at any time. That's why we patrol this area. But if you really want to go to the abandoned city, you'll have to run for 7 or 8 days. More importantly, the barbarian land is too large. Once you head in a wrong direction, you'll never see the city. You have to know that this place is originally called the Fertile Plains and it's larger than the entire kingdom of Grey Castle. No, even larger than the 4 kingdoms combined. Really? The wolf girl could not help but frown. She did not worry about the long distance since she had once traveled in the wilderness for 2 consecutive months to practice her fighting skills. She did not worry about the time either due to being a seasoned hunter. She had enough patience to wait for the demons. In fact, she really hoped to live in the wild for some time as she would never spend her gold royals unconsciously here. However, failing to find the abandoned city was totally unacceptable for her. Yes, but I admire your courage and adventurous spirit. Lightning stood with her arms bent. You're brave enough to begin an exploration based on limited information. That means you've got the potential to become a good explorer. I don't know why you refused to join the Witch Union, but you can join the Neverwinter Exploration Group. What do you think? Do you want to explore this continent wrapped in mist together with us? And to join our barbecue? Maggie cheerfully raised her hands. No, thanks. Lorgar could not help but sigh in her heart, feeling that things had deviated from her expectations. For example, Maggie, who looked as fierce as the 4-winged eagle, turned out to be an immature little girl instead of a qualified warrior. Lorgar came here to challenge her own limits and climb the peak of fighting skills, not to play with some child. She decided to search for the city on her own and considered this as another challenge arranged by the 3 gods. When she was about to leave, Lightning stopped her. Wait. I'll take you to the Tequila Ruins, if you join the Neverwinter Exploration Group. Have you been there? Lorgar's ears erected at once. Of course, we're the only ones who've touched its city wall in over 400 years, Lightning proudly announced, and I know much about demons and have even fought a very powerful senior demon. This will be unique information for you. Think about it. Chapter 852, A Like-Minded Friend. When the sun was setting, the shadow of the impassable mountain range started to grow gradually, and it seemed as if the mountain range itself was growing constantly. In the end, the shadow together with the sky mixed in darkness which engulfed the predominantly brown land that was dotted with some green areas. This was the first time that Lorgar saw such a scene. When flying in the sky, a huge monster like Maggie could only cast a small shadow on the ground. The darkness seemed to approach slowly, but they just could not get rid of it no matter how fast they flew. The pure vastness of the barbarian land filled her with awe. Lightning moved closer and whistled. Let's go down. We're here. Ow. When the beast was going down, the wolf girl on its back felt as if she was about to float up in midair. This feeling frightened her. She could not help but firmly grasp the beast's skin. Before long, the 3 witches successfully landed on a hillside. This is our exploration group's secret base. Lightning waved at Lorgar. Come with me. The little girl suddenly disappeared behind a big tree stump. The wolf girl came up and found that the stump turned out to be hollow. It had a small door facing the steep slope, and behind the door, she was surprised to see that there was a pile of firewood and some simple stone chairs inside. It'll take 2 days to fly to Tequila. We'll spend the night here and continue our journey early tomorrow morning. Lightning opened the window opposite to the door to let the air flow. Most of the decaying smell inside the stump instantly disappeared. Now it's our barbecue time. Wait to try my yummy toast. Did you build this place? Lorgar curiously looked around. She had accepted Lightning's invitation and joined the so-called Neverwinter Exploration Group because the little girl had promised to bring her to the abandoned city and to provide her further information about demons, which precisely piqued her curiosity. After all, the wolf girl believed that the more she knew about her opponents, the easier it would be to defeat them. She had to force herself to leave the city knowing little about demons and the wilderness, but now as she finally met a reliable source of intelligence, she decided to make some sacrifices to keep it. She felt it was not a big deal to spend some time playing with these 2 little girls. I didn't build it. I just found a place created by nature. Lightning quickly made a fire, lighting up the room inside the stump. It was eaten hollow by some worms and the upper part of it collapsed during a storm. Its branches and leaves happened to form a natural roof. As for the window and door, they were cut out by Maggie. We've many bases like this in the barbarian land. An observant explorer is always able to spot a shelter in the wild. Upon hearing her reply, Lorger felt this little girl was quite trustworthy. In the flickering firelight, she noticed that there were bolts behind the shabby door and window that could be locked to ensure safety. She also saw that a part of the roof above the open fireplace could be opened for venting smoke, and this outlet could obviously act as a double for an escape hatch in the event of an emergency. All the firewood was shelved in higher places to avoid being soaked in water, and 2 ditches were dug out in the ground to ensure good drainage. Although there was a decaying smell in the room, it was not humid. She noticed many other similar details in this room, and it did not seem like these arrangements were made by a little child. She started to doubt whether she had underestimated this exploration group. Maggie took out some jerky from her backpack and cooked it over the bonfire while humming a tuneless melody. Lightning picked out many condiment cans which had been wrapped around her waist and evenly sprinkled them on the surface of the jerky. The smooth cooperation between them suggested that this was not their first time to do such a thing together. Soon, a tempting scent spread throughout the stump. "Try it." Lightning handed some roast meat to Lorger. Lorger grabbed it and, after a little hesitation, slowly put it into her mouth. Extremely rich layers of flavor immediately filled her mouth. It was warm and oily, and fresh and salty because of the spices being used. The meat was tender inside and it had a crispy crust. It was hard for the wolf girl to believe that something cooked in the wild could be as delicious as the food in the finest feast of the Iron Sand City. She could not help but happily wag her tail and then breathed out the aroma lingering in her throat. So yummy. "Of course, it's not common meat, coo," said Maggie proudly. "It's the meat of a giant lake frog in the ice spring of the Great Snow Mountain. I made a huge effort to catch it. Each of its legs is the size of lightning. It's so big that we can only preserve it and eat it slowly." The wolf girl was stunned. "Lake frog? What's that? Is it really edible?" "Don't worry. We explorers exist to explore unknown secrets, and different food is one of them," said the little girl, as if she had seen through Lorger's mind. The wolf girl bit her lips but failed to close her mouth in the end. She closed her eyes and swallowed the remaining meat. After enjoying the aftertaste in her mouth, she looked at Lightning and asked, "Are there only 2 members of this Neverwinter exploration group?" "Currently, there are 3, the little girl corrected." "What about the other witches in the Witch Union? Why do you want me to join this group?" After thinking, Princess Lorger still chose to be blunt. "I came to the Western region to challenge strong opponents and improve my skills. Exploring the unknown doesn't intrigue me." Lightning fell silent for a while, which was rare for her. "That's because the other witches seldom leave Neverwinter. Even if some of them want to do so, few of them would like to wander in the wild. As compared to exploration, they've more important things to do, such as staying in factories to produce machines. My father said that one person alone could hardly complete a real adventure, so I've got to build my own team to become a great explorer. You're the only witch we've met in the barbarian land." Lorger suddenly realized that this little girl was serious about the exploration group. This was not just a passing fancy for her but a dream she cherished. Judging from her lonely tone, the wolf girl could tell that most people just considered Lightning's plan as a childish game instead of something serious. This was similar to what she had thought in the first place. For a moment, Lorger saw herself in this little girl. Before she had won all those challenges and become a real warrior, few people had been able to understand her passion and dedication toward fighting since, even in the Iron Sand City, female warriors were rare. With this thought in mind, the wolf girl slightly sighed and pretended to be casual. "Since I'm a member of the exploration group now, what should I do next?" Hearing this, Lightning's eyes lit up. She fished out a parchment map in her pocket and gave it to Lorger. "The areas that we've not yet explored are all marked on this map. If you happen to step into these areas, please draw the things you discover on this map, such as birds' nests, honeycombs, wolf caves, etc. Anything will do. But you can't enjoy them alone, which is the most important rule of our exploration group." "You've got to wait until we come back and we'll eat them together," interrupted Maggie. Lorgar opened the map and saw many bizarre drawings on it, with quite a few notes. For example, 2 chicken drumsticks and 4 eggs were drawn in a spot named Eagle Nest. Seeing this, the wolf girl did not know whether to laugh or cry. Why do I feel that I've been deceived? She put the map away. Ahem, well, I got it, but what do you mean by come back? Are you leaving for Neverwinter? His Majesty Roland is about to send troops to the eastern region and Hermes. At that time, we'll probably leave with the First Army. It'll take at least a few months before we come back. After all, His Majesty has to depend on us if he wants to investigate the enemy's situation or carry out shooting corrections for the cannons. Lightning patted her chest. When we're away, you'll be in charge of the exploration job in the barbarian land. Chapter 853, Preparing for the Battle. After a night's sleep, the 3 witches set out on their journey again. After a half-day flight, Lorgar finally saw the abandoned city. She could not help but hold her breath. The city was much larger than she had imagined. She saw a vast expanse of green land below and some damaged brown walls standing down there. Lightning had told her this city had been abandoned over 400 years ago, but even now, Lorgar could still discern the incomplete sections of the city walls. She found that the ruins of this city covered an area that was 5 or 6 times larger than Iron Sand City and was big enough for over 100,000 people to live in. Looking at its fragmented wreckage, she could still sense its greatness. Based on the rule that each person in the city needed to be supported by 10 people in the surrounding towns and villages, she was surprised to find that there might have been nearly 1 million people living in this wild land. This is incredible. How did a kingdom that built such a large city lose to the demons in the end? Lorgar suddenly recalled what His Majesty had told her. The Battle of Divine Will isn't a clash between 2 tribes, but a comprehensive war that determines which civilization can survive. At the time, she had been irritated hearing it, but now she somehow understood. At this moment, she now believed that the king had not been trying to intimidate her when he had said, "I don't want to send you to die." All of a sudden, she felt much better. When Lightning gestured, they started to lower their height. In the end, they landed on a relatively complete section of the city wall. The top of the wall, though damaged, was still as wide as 20+ steps, which was wide enough for 2 4-wheeled carriages to travel side by side. In the walls covered by moss and vines, they saw a few round holes and wondered how much force was required to create such damage to these huge stone walls. The little girl came over and said, "You may know this already, but this city was the last line of defense for the Witch Empire. Unfortunately, they failed to resist the demons' attack in the end." Does this mean that the over 400-year-old witches mentioned by Ashes are actually survivors of this Witch Empire? Did the 4 kingdoms and the church that treated the witches as heretics all rise after the failure of those witches? The wolf girl suppressed these questions since she believed that the ones who knew the story must have been deliberately blocking this information. She had never heard anything related to it from the traveling traders, and even the residents of Neverwinter seemed to know nothing about it. She thought she had better not get to the bottom of it as she was not a member of the Witch Union. She opened the map Lightning had given her yesterday. Is Tequila located on the edge of your patrol area? If demons want to attack Neverwinter, which direction will they usually come from? They'll come from anywhere to the west of the ruins, but it's extremely dangerous for us to go that deep into the barbarian land even though we can fly. The wolf girl asked, "Why?" Maggie replied, "It's because of the mist. Sometimes even the sky will turn red." "What's that?" Lorgar frowned. "It's a life support thing for demons, just like the air we breathe." Lightning looked to the northwest. "Today's a nice day, so the sky looks blue. But if it's rainy or cloudy, especially when dark clouds gathering in the sky, we'll clearly see the red mist on the horizon when we're high up in the sky. This mist is toxic to witches. Even if we manage not to inhale any of it, we may still get badly hurt simply by touching it. Since we don't know how far it can reach, we seldom cross Tequila to go further west." After that, the little girl outlined some weak points of demons. "I see." The wolf girls wiggled her ears. "As long as I can pull out the pipes behind them, they'll become weak and vulnerable. Lightning added, but it's not easy to do so. Just like the senior demon I told you about last night, it has almost no flaws in a fight. If you really meet the enemy, you'd better retreat immediately and inform His Majesty, Roland. Don't worry. I know how to deal with it properly. Lorgar patted her own chest, full of fighting spirit. Demons are tough opponents, but that's what makes fighting stimulating and rewarding. Besides, being invincible as a group on the battlefield doesn't necessarily mean that they're strong as individuals. I can seize a chance to hunt a solitary demon, and even if no demons appear on my journey, I can still fight the hybrid demonic beasts. She had already spotted several big demonic beasts when she was on Maggie's back flying up in the sky. She looked out at the uninhabited wildland, feeling excited about her journey again. The road she had dreamed about had become much clearer now. It extended further, with the sand replaced by green areas. She believed that she was going to stay here for a long time. Every day, Roland had 1 or 2 meetings to attend since he had issued the order to go out to battle. From the battle plan to the logistics arrangements, everything needed his approval. He had enjoyed this tingling feeling of absolute power at first, but he soon got overwhelmed by the heavy workload as he got deeper into this preparation process. Now that Neverwinter managed more than just a city, a whole team had to work on plans that had previously been made by one person. After discussing such trivial matters every day, Roland gradually came to understand and even sympathize with those brainless leaders in the history who did not like to deal with state affairs. Imagine that you have to listen to some people nagging about things that you neither remember nor understand every day. You would naturally get annoyed with it. Had Scroll not integrated and filtered the numbers in the reports for him, he would have also preferred to be a distant leader. After all, he had been just a mechanical engineer before traveling into this world. As compared to the complicated logistics arrangements, he paid more attention to the battle plan proposed by the Ministry of Defense. The First Army planned to concentrate all its fire on the holy city of Hermes that was surrounded by tall and thick city walls. They made a plan based on their experience in the Great Snow Mountain and were going to prepare enough cannons and ammunition for this attack. It was a joint operation involving the First Army soldiers, witches, and the tequila survivors. Roland had to admit that the Pearl of the Northern region was indeed talented. In the plan, she put forward the concept of collaborative operation, such as utilizing the abilities of the witches and tequila survivors to launch surprise raids in all directions. She suggested that by doing so, Neverwinter troops could quickly disrupt the defensive formation of the enemy and could attack them from both the sky and the ground. Though many of her ideas were not yet prepared enough, they were certainly impressive ones to have in this era. Roland believed that it was a wise decision to put her in the Ministry of Defense. To successfully implement this plan, he had to make sure that the gods' punishment witches of tequila would willingly obey orders rather than doing whatever they wanted regardless of the commands. This was the first problem he needed to solve while everyone was busy preparing for the battle. The solution was very simple. For instance, he could invite all the survivors who were going to participate in the upcoming battle to enter his dream world. Chapter 854, An Unexpected Invitation in the Dream World. They say that practice makes perfect, and Roland was inclined to agree. He was now very adept at getting into the dream world. As long as he thought of something specific from the dream world with his eyes closed, he could quickly activate the huge beam of light and then wake naturally up in the morning of that world. However, this time, he was woken up by cellphone's ringtone. Fortunately, this was not really sleeping, and so he didn't really feel tired. He sprang up and picked up the phone on the bedside table. To his great surprise, it was Garcia. "Hey, do you know what time is it?" "It's 6:30 in the morning, which is not too early," Garcia interrupted, "and how do I know whether you'll have some other relative who suddenly came to visit?" The corner of his mouth twisted, knowing that she was still sore about being stood up by him last time. Is there anything I can do for you? Didn't you always want to know what the erosion is? The association has set a time for new members to visit this afternoon. After you finish your breakfast, come to room 0827. Didn't you say it's in the afternoon? You're not the only new member. It takes time for us to go join the other new members from the other districts. She raised her voice. What? Are you going out with some relative again today? Yes, and more than one, he replied in his heart but did not dare to speak it out loud, otherwise she would definitely come to stand in his doorway. More importantly, he was indeed very curious about the erosion, so he answered, "Oh, I see, but I slept late last night, so, I don't smell very nice. Let me take a shower first. Sorry to keep you waiting." She was silent, but he somehow still felt her contempt for him. "Please be quick," she shouted and then hung up the phone. Now he had to hurry up. He put on his clothes, walked into the living room, and found Zero busy frying eggs in the kitchen. She skillfully used the spatula in her hand, not looking like a junior high school girl at all. "Good morning," he said, "I'm going out now, but I'll be back very soon." She revealed a suspicious expression. "Uncle, are you going to do your morning exercise?" "Well, yes," he replied casually. "By the way, there's a staff meeting in the afternoon. I may come home late today, so don't wait for me to have dinner." "Got it," the little girl pouted. Outside the apartment building, the street was bustling again. Wisps of steam were coming out of the rice noodle restaurants and fried bread sticks were sizzling in the work at the stall. There was also broadcast sounds and traders peddling. It was late autumn and most people wore thick clothes. However, some elderly people, who wore only short-sleeved shirts and sweatpants, kept practicing in the morning. They were running as fast as young men around the apartment building. Roland walked into an alley not far from the apartment building and stopped in front of a closed shop. On the door, there was an eye-catching leasing advertisement with a big word "rented" written on it. He took out a key and opened the side door. Inside the shop, more than 20 witches simultaneously knelt to him saying, "Your Majesty." For a moment, he felt as if he had returned to Neverwinter. Walking into this shop was like entering another world for him. "Welcome to the dreamland," he nodded and said. "Do you mean to say that we have a special task today?" On the second floor of the shop, Phyllis, Faldy, Ling and Donnan were waiting for him to give further orders. As the first batch of pioneers entering this dreamland, they had known something about this world and would serve as guides for the rest of the tequila survivors here. They could tell them how to enjoy the life here and could instruct them how to hunt fallen evils, which reduced the burden on Roland. This store was one of his rewards for the last hunting trip and he had hired an agent to rent this place. Compared to the warehouse before, it was much more spacious and private. He told them about the Martialist Association's invitation. According to Garcia, the association is planning to tell the new members the inside story. "We'll be taken to the association's headquarters whose location has remained a secret, so I want to take this chance to find out the base where they store the force of nature. I need your help. Let my bug stay with you." Faldy summoned her magic bug nest and picked a bug. "So I can know where you are all the time." After he agreed, the witch placed the beetle on his collar. It quickly climbed into his long hair to hide. Though he could clearly feel a thing on his neck, he still looked the same from the outside. He suppressed the feeling of discomfort and turned his head to look at another 2 witches. "Phyllis and Ling, please come with me. Do you remember how to take a taxi?" Phyllis nodded. "Wave to stop a taxi and tell the driver to follow the car in the front. Then pay him when we arrive. Don't chat with the taxi driver and no matter what he asks, we'll just remain silent." Ling added, patting her chest, "Rest assured, Your Majesty, we remember it clearly." "Good," said Roland. "When you arrive, let Ling try to sneak into the headquarters first. Although there's no godstone of retaliation in this world, the Martialist Association may have some other methods to affect your magic power. If you can't break in, don't force yourselves. Your most important task is to keep yourselves hidden. Got it?" "Yes, Your Majesty," the 3 witches replied simultaneously. "So, Your Majesty, what about me?" Donnan pointed to herself while eagerly looking at him. "You stay here and take care of the other tequila witches." He took out 10 100 yuan bills from his wallet and gave them to her. "Here's the money for takeouts, including breakfast, lunch and dinner. Let's postpone the entertainment plans until tomorrow." "What? But I'm also very good at sneaking into places. Donnan was disappointed. That's why you have to stay here. If something unexpected happens, you're the only one who can lead the witches to leave this place without being noticed. He patted her shoulder. Of course, if you successfully take care of everyone here today, I'll choose a day to take you to a movie theater. I got it. When she heard this special reward, she suddenly cheered up. Please leave it to me. He had taught the 4 witches how to order takeout food, and all the quick learners had already mastered this skill. He believed that as long as Donnan was here, they would be all right. Now he was well prepared for his trip to the headquarters of the Martialist Association. Chapter 855, Power and Responsibility. After making all the arrangements for the trip, Roland rushed back to the apartment building as fast as he could. Unfortunately, he underestimated Garcia's diligence. In the corridor, he saw a familiar figure leaning against the wall near room 0825 while talking on the phone and watching the bustle downstairs. She wore a gray and white t-shirt, loose black pants, and ankle-high skate shoes, looking both youthful and full of energy. If he had never known her, he would have thought of her as a girl-next-door type of woman, a lively and cheerful character often seen on TV. Judging from her face, she was still a little angry but not cold and harsh as the Garcia he remembered. He could not deny that Princess Garcia Wimbledon, Queen of Clearwater, looked surprisingly good in this sports outfit. When he came close to the door of the room, she saw him. All right, I've got something else to do. I'm hanging up and don't call me back if it's only to try to persuade me. Is the Clover Group calling you again about the demolition matter? He pretended to be casual and asked. It has nothing to do with you. She put away the phone, her expression skeptical. Where have you been? Didn't you say that you wanted to take a shower? Do you know how many ways there are to get rid of an odor? One is cleaning, another one is covering it with a new odor. He talked nonsense while keeping a straight face. The tenant, that little girl living with me, needed to use the bathroom. She didn't want to be late for school, so I really couldn't fight with her. I thought I could get some sweat to cover my smell, so I went running outside. But, surprisingly, this body just doesn't sweat very much. Now I see why you martialists always look neat and clean. Well, this isn't important at all. Anyhow, I didn't sneak away. You see that I'm standing right in front of you now, don't you? Garcia stared at him for a long time before opening her mouth. I don't want to interfere with your private life, but it's not good to indulge yourself. More importantly, it's also about education. What? Roland was stunned. I mean those girls who came out of your apartment. Why can't you get things done somewhere else? Why do you have to bring them home? Have you already forgotten that there's a little girl in your home, said Garcia, frowning. He almost choked upon hearing such words. He had deliberately arranged the tequila witches to cut off their consciousness and get into the dreamland once Zero had left for school, but he had never expected what the other residents would have thought about these women coming out of his home. Garcia had the complete wrong idea based on what she had seen. It's true that some martialists will become less decent when they become famous. In the face of money and fame, a man will easily lose himself, but don't forget that we're fighting for this world and always have to maintain a high morale. Overindulgence will only make your movements slow. Ahem, I got it. Feeling that she wanted to give him a moral education lecture, he immediately interrupted her. We can talk about this matter later. Could you please let me change my clothes first? I don't want to be late for our visit. She closed her mouth in displeasure and glared at him. Be quick. He dressed up by putting on his new suit. Under Zero's gaze, he put a fried egg into a sandwich bag to eat as breakfast and walked out of the apartment. You, at the door, Garcia blinked at him. It's my first time visiting the headquarters and I thought that I should dress formally. Roland shrugged. I'm a new member of the association and casual clothing seems disrespectful for such an occasion. What do you think? Whatever you want. She shook her head. But to my surprise, you look quite good in this suit. Of course, you get what you pay for. This trim custom-made suit cost me a lot of my robbery income. After all, the clothes make the man. An ordinary-looking man would look great immediately after dressing up and, as an added benefit, I'm slim and have nice long gray hair. Back in the world where I lived before, people would believe that I'm an elf prince, he thought to himself. They went downstairs together and waited outside the residential area. A large bus soon came to fetch them. He noticed that it did not have a number plate and all its windows were covered by black curtains. He could not see anything inside it. "Get on the bus," Garcia whispered. He somehow felt that she looked much more serious now. When he stepped onto the bus, he pretended to casually look back at the street side. He saw that Phyllis had already stopped a taxi. When the door was closed, he found that it was surprisingly bright inside. All the lights along the aisle were turned on and quite a few people were sitting on the bus. Most of them were dressed in various styles and looked like a group of performance artists. Only a few seemed like normal people, but they all were engrossed in their own affairs instead of greeting Garcia. He soon noticed that some guys, who obviously harbored ulterior motives, had fixed their eyes on him since he had gotten on the bus. Garcia did not say anything. She held Roland's hand, which was very unusual, and walked with him directly to the back of the bus. "Are they your colleagues?" he whispered to her when they sat down. "The Martialist Association isn't a company." She rolled her eyes at him. "Most people in this bus are newly awakened people just like you. It's also the first time for me to meet them." "So many of them?" He was a little surprised. He roughly counted and found there were over 20 people in this bus. "Yes, there are quite a lot of them. The last time I went to the association, there were only 5 or 6 new members, but that's not surprising," she replied. "Although ordinary people know nothing about the changes in the world, the ones awakened with the force of nature can still sense them. I've told you that not all the awakened ones choose to join us. The centrists aren't less than the association's martialists. Now, as the erosion intensifies and the number of fallen evils rapidly grows, the situation has become more dangerous for the centrists. More of them are going to join our association in the future." "So you mean most of them are wild martialists or self-training martialists? You did find more appropriate words to describe them." She curled her mouth into a smile. "I guess so, but that's just between us. Don't call them that publicly. They don't like restrictions. That's why they refused to join the association. Gaining great strength will boost a person's ego, making him or her become arrogant. This not only hinders their progress but also gives them a very odd attitude." "As for the odd attitude, I think I've already experienced it," he said casually. In the past, a conflict had happened where some wild martialist joined the association and killed several martialists when they were performing a hunting job. In the end, the defenders stood out to kill the wild martialist. "You'd better ignore their provocations as the association will severely punish such behaviors." "The wild martialists are that strong?" "Yes, these people often get attacked by fallen evils and, compared to newly awakened ones, they're much more experienced in actual combats and are better in reacting quickly in emergency situations, but they're usually obsessed by worldly affairs. If you stop overindulging yourself and practice hard, you can rapidly improve yourself." She sighed and continued. "The force of nature is a gift from the deities. It's an ability to protect ourselves rather than a tool to exploit others. If we fail to stop the erosion, the entire world may cease to exist. Many awakened ones just enjoy the pleasures brought by their power, but completely forget their responsibility." He found what she said sounded familiar. He thought for a moment and realized that perhaps this was also the reason that those witches, who had been aware of the harm caused by demons, established the Union 800 years ago. Suddenly, it quieted down outside. The grating sounds made by the bus wheels rubbing against the road became deep and simple as if the bus was traveling alone in a spacious tunnel. Half an hour later, the bus finally stopped. Just when he thought that they had arrived, the bus started to shake slightly and he felt weightless all of a sudden. The bus was sinking into the ground. Chapter 856, Prism City. "This is," Roland looked at Garcia. "It's a lift," she proudly responded. Wait a moment, soon you'll be able to see. No long after she had finished talking, the light outside of the window turned from red to green and then the curtains were automatically lifted, revealing the view outside. Roland immediately understood the reason for her pride. The bus was parked on a huge iron plate, surrounded by yellow and black warning signs painted on concrete walls with 5 or 6 metal orbits embedded in, which continuously issued a gear-grinding sound. They were traveling down a tunnel with each descending level marked by dazzling spotlights and huge number signs. Within a few minutes, they had descended more than 100 meters, but the numbers were still growing. Seeing the continuously rotating orange alert lights in the outer edge of the iron plate, which was like a scene from a sci-fi movie, he suddenly felt that as compared to this sophisticated way of entering, his way to get into Third Border City was way too backward, which was still reliant on hemp ropes and steam engines. His respect for an organization that could construct something like that was instantly increased by a few levels. Without substantial economic and political power in the background, a bunch of martialists would never be able to construct something like that. No wonder Garcia was so proud of it. Even those strange-tempered Wild Awakened were stunned by the scene. They started discussing in the bus while looking out of the window, as if they wanted to explore how deep the place was actually hidden. This was actually a good move, Roland thought. The closed curtains before were probably meant to keep new people from knowing the specific location of the headquarters, but after entering the ground there was no such need anymore, so they could let everyone admire this spectacular project, which could also pose as proof of the association's power. He was curious to see if Ling, who was following them, could find a chance to infiltrate. When the number became 235, the iron plate finally stopped descending and many holes appeared on the wall. Then, the bus moved again and headed into one of them. The trip was very short this time as they soon reached their destination. Roland followed Garcia out of the bus and discovered that there was a wide underground square in front of him, being illuminated with dense headlights, almost as bright as daylight. If not for the previous part of the trip, it would have been hard to believe that he was deep underground. A sculpture was erected in the center of the square. At first glance, it looked like a big hand holding an irregular polyhedron. There were also several buses parked next to the statue. It seemed that they were not the only newcomers. Are these people from other cities? Roland pointed at the crowd around the sculpture. Garcia nodded in agreement. The association owns many divisions, but it's only 2 headquarters. In order to get into contact with the erosion, one must come to these 2 places. He was briefly stunned. The erosion from the outside world. Can it be seen directly from here? Not only it can be seen, but you can also touch it, though you would never want to do that. Garcia rolled her eyes. Did you think that we're just a cult which asks people to fight the evil? The purpose of visiting the headquarters is to show newcomers the real danger that the world is facing. Some things, unless seen by your own eyes, are impossible to believe them. Disaster is close at hand. Just then, the lights above them suddenly dimmed down and darkness suddenly came from all directions, making everyone's vision to focus on a small area in the center of the square. As though a curtain was opened on stage, 2 bright beams of light fell from the dome, one shining on the sculpture and the other shining on a black-dressed lady. She was standing on a platform at one side of the square, looked around 30 years old, wearing a classic martial arts garment with her long black hair tied up on her head. One of her eyes seemed to have been damaged and was covered by an eye patch. The force of nature in the dream world was not limited to gender, and it did not have the kind of effect that the magic power had in affecting the appearance. She looked no different than an ordinary person, not too tall, but with more of an imposing manner. The woman waved at everyone and then said loudly, "Dear awakened ones, good afternoon. I am Lon, chief disciple of the Rock's Defender. Welcome to Prism City." Prism, did she mean the polyhedron on the sculpture? Roland thought and heard whispers coming from the wild martialists, who appeared to be quite dissatisfied with her words. Before he could ask Garcia, Lon continued, "Of course, welcoming the new students was the responsibility of defenders, but unfortunately, Sky City encountered some problems, so my master and the other 3 defenders all left 2 days ago. In order to avoid wasting time, I'll be the one to welcome you all. I know that some of you awoke many years ago and can't be treated as real newcomers. However, the situation has changed drastically. Since you're willing to come here, it means you've approved the ability of the association and you should naturally put all the past temporarily behind you. Combating the fallen evil should be your priority now. The association doesn't care about your past identity and status, but only your future performance. The more critical the crisis is, the more the awakened should be united. If you don't accept the practice of the association, you're still free to leave right now. While she was talking, the black-dressed woman made a waving gesture, but no one in the square moved, and even the noisy discussions quieted down. This chief disciple is quite adept, Roland smirked. With the increase of the fallen evil, the endangered wild awakened had no choice but to apply to join the association. No matter who they were before, they could only follow this option now. The woman was aware of that, so deliberately acted as if giving them a choice, but in reality, gave them no choice at all. Strength was an important criterion when persuading an opponent. Being the martialist association that could protect others, demonstrating their own strength would be the most effective way in this case. Garcia looked at Roland with a perplexed expression for a while and said softly, "She's my master." "What?" He was stunned. "Your master?" "She's the senior that I mentioned the other day," Garcia sighed. "Unless you have to, try not to be around her too much. My master doesn't like irresponsible and not punctual people." Oh, so that was the case, Roland thought. Since you've all made your choice, then the association welcomes any new blood. Lon gazed upon the square and nodded with satisfaction. "I'm not going to say much. Nothing is more impressive than personally experiencing it. Now, please come with me and see for yourselves the imminent crisis of the world. You'll soon realize that the battle of divine will isn't far away from us." Chapter 857, The Nature of the Erosion. Hearing those words, Roland could not help but tremble. Why would there be battle of divine will in the dream world too? He looked at Garcia, but her expression didn't change at all, as if she already knew or she didn't care about it. Roland could only keep his doubts to himself and under the lights, followed the crowd towards the square. Reaching there, he noticed that there were many passages embedded in the towering rock walls like the structure inside a honeycomb. Whether it was entering from the ground or transitioning between the aisles, people had to take elevators on the rails. Now that the square was not as bright as before and his sight got used to the darkness, he could see dozens of elevators going up and down like floating fireflies. They gave off a feeling of a futuristic city. Even though this design was beautiful, it was extremely inconvenient to use. If it was built in the city center as a landmark, it would be all right, but buried under the ground like this, who would be able to see it? And in case of a fire, power outages, and other emergencies, it would even be hard to escape from here. Of course, building the headquarters underground was already irrational even when considering the aspect of preventing others to infiltrate or the necessity of keeping it a secret. There must have been another reason to do that unless the Martialist Association had too much money to spare. As they entered the aisle number 24, Roland realized that the ground he was standing on was actually a moving ladder and he only had to stand on it to keep moving. Adopting such a design in an underground structure was actually quite shocking. As if realizing his doubts, Garcia shrugged her shoulders. "There used to be a mine here, and we used the abandoned mine tunnels to build all the elevator aisles you see on the walls, but of course, part of them were newly excavated. This depends on the speed of the erosion." "The erosion happened in the mine?" "Not exactly, but for now you can think of it as such. So the reason for building the headquarters underground is to prevent the erosion from developing?" Garcia looked at him with a weird expression. "No, it's not to prevent the erosion from developing but to guard against awakened ones with an ulterior motive." When she saw that he wanted to ask more, she shook her head and said, "You'll soon understand." The passage soon led them into another hall, which looked a lot like a lecture hall, with descending levels, forming a podium at the bottom. The defensive measures here were obviously much better. There were martialists everywhere, wearing the same cloths, standing expressionless on either side of the hall and staring indifferently at the newcomers, showing no welcoming gestures. Aren't warriors supposed to be straightforward and passionate? With an attitude like that towards the newly awakened ones, no wonder people weren't willing to join them, Roland thought. Once everyone has sat down, the chief disciple Lan stood up on the podium. Without saying anything, she opened a curtain on stage, exposing the bottom of a huge glass chest. Roland couldn't help but frown. A dark red crystal was placed inside the chest. It seemed weightless as it floated midair. It reminded him of tequila's magic core. But the force of nature in the dream world was not displaying ever-changing effects like the magic power. Additionally, this crystal did not seem to be realistic. It actually looked like a bad sample of a 3D model. But seeing Lan's serious expression, it didn't look like she was joking. This is erosion, Garcia said with a deep voice, or actually a loophole. What? Roland was stunned. The one on stage is just a small part of it, she sighed, our world is becoming riddled with holes. That's the essence of erosion. I think some of you may have already guessed or felt it. Lan gazed through the audience and said word by word. An evil force has entered our world. It allows the fallen evil to multiply in numbers quickly, posing a serious threat to the safety of the awakened ones. But as far as I am concerned, this notion is incorrect. It was never an evil force, but rather an overlay from another world. The audience suddenly uproared. What do you mean? Can you elaborate? What's this other world? When did the Martialist Association become an academy of science? So what are the fallen evils, aliens? In sharp contrast with the real newcomers, those who had awakened the force of nature long ago started yelling loudly, without respect to the chief disciple. Quiet, Lan said unmoved, I'll answer your questions after the following demonstration. As she said that, the glass chest slowly rose, exposing the crystal, and then 3 hanging rods fell on top of the podium with a camera hanging from each of them. At the same time, the wall behind Lan also lit up. It turned out to be a huge screen showing 3 different pictures, shot respectively from the 3 cameras. Roland quickly noticed a phenomenon that shocked him. No matter from which direction you looked at it, the crystal always showed the same appearance. How's that possible? In order to look like this, it's got to be a perfect sphere. An angular thing represented discontinuous changes when it was rotating. It should have appeared visually different on each side. However, he was stunned when he didn't find any difference or movement in the 3 pictures, as if it was not a moving object but rather a red spot on the screen. His brain had subconsciously identified it as a virtual image, as if the crystal itself didn't exist. But Lan's next move once again surprised Roland. The chief disciple took an iron bar and inserted it straight into the red crystal. However, the stick did not penetrate the virtual shadow as he expected, but instead disappeared in it in front of everyone. Through the screen, they could see that all the 3 cameras captured the original look of the iron bar, clearly showing its polishing traces and angles, but the red spot in the 3 pictures looked still the same. It seemed as if there had been 3 iron bars inserted from a different angle, into one same spot. When Lan pulled it back, the bar in her hands had become shorter. The hall suddenly went quiet. Seeing such a strange scene, everyone remained silent, as if someone had clamped hand over his or her mouth. After a while, someone said, "Can I come up to see?" "Help yourself." Lan nodded. The man walked to the podium and stared at the red crystal for a long time. Suddenly, with a shout, he reached out to it. His skin was lightly colored in silver light. Apparently, he was using the force of nature. Not many warriors could achieve that. Garcia had once mentioned to Roland that those who were able to spur out the force of nature like that resembled a lot the fallen evil. Normal weapons were unlikely to hurt them. To be able to master such a skill, one had to be extraordinarily talented, or very experienced through life and death situations over the years. Thus, they were far stronger than the average martialists. This was probably the reason for their arrogance. Lan stood still, without any intention of stopping him. His palm went through the crystal unobstructed, without catching anything, and just like the iron bar before, it disappeared. Soon after, the man screamed. He raised his hand, showing only the half of a bloody palm. Everyone gasped in astonishment. Roland finally understood what Garcia meant with those words. You definitely don't want to touch it, because everything that came into contact with it turned into a void. After the victim was taken to be treated by the martialists, a couple more stood up, hoping to come up and have a closer look. Lon allowed all of them, but they were much more cautious while observing. In the end, the chief disciple simply arranged for everyone to take turns to experience the incredible phenomenon from a close distance. Roland was no exception as well. When his turn came, he acted carefreely and circled twice around the crystal, but he suddenly felt his heart sink. Its internal red rippling light seemed very familiar. He had once seen a similar scene in the Divine Land too. But in that domain, the red light hanging above him represented the bloody moon. Chapter 858, The Membrane Overlaid. You're Roland, aren't you? When Roland was contemplating the erosion, Lon suddenly spoke. Ah, it's me. He recovered from his solemn thoughts and Garcia's words flashed across his mind. Hang on, would she be trying to find trouble with me for having stood her up? I've heard Garcia mention you several times. She did not face Roland, so he could not see her expression. She said you're a rare and independent awakened who's not disturbed by desire and ambition. This is very rare for the average person, so she's very happy that you've agreed to join the association. Is that so? Roland replied reluctantly. It was clear to him that Lon must have been implying that he was a wild awakened when she said independent, but he wondered why she said that Garcia was elated when he agreed to join the association. He clearly remembered that Garcia had been expressionless when she had let him fill out the application. Although I hate people who aren't punctual, this is a common problem for many. After all, you can't feel the change of time nor can you hear it ticking, so for some special people, it's not an unforgivable flaw. Inexplicably, Roland felt that there was a glimmer of emotion when the chief disciple said these words. There's one thing you should know about special people. Though they're uncommon, there are still quite a number of them. If they don't treasure their special feature and maximize it, they'll be eliminated sooner or later. Is this a warning that I should work wholeheartedly for the association and not cause problems like the other wild awakened ones? Roland secretly frowned as he really did not like this kind of preaching. Perhaps he would not have minded it before, but after he became the king of Grey Castle, he had also changed his mentality. After you've finished watching, you can leave. Lon finally turned around and said calmly, listen carefully to what I'm going to say next as it might help you. Next? Roland twitched his mouth and did not take this brief conversation to heart. He was overwhelmed by a cloud of confusion. Whether the Martialist Association could defeat the erosion and save the world was something he did not care about. After returning to his seat, he still frowned. What are the deities thinking about? According to the research data of the underground civilization, the bloody moon is the key to transforming the magic power, and also the basis for the existence of the dreamland. In a certain sense, it's the equivalent of the mastermind behind the scenes, existing like a background. Even if one wanted to annex the dream world, there's no need to show their original appearance, right? The witches can see the real body of the bloody moon because that's the real world, yet this dreamland is a domain purely founded on his and Zero's memories. Wouldn't this mean that the mastermind had seen the circuit signal operating behind the world? Or could the speculation be wrong? Or maybe I had misunderstood some information that had pointed me in the wrong direction? So do you believe it now? Garcia glared at him. That's definitely not something that can exist in reality. I've never doubted you. Roland shook his head and tried to suppress his distractions. But your master wasn't as scary as you'd described. Was there something wrong with the master? She was a little surprised. She said quite a lot about how special I was and how the association thought highly of me, Roland said sarcastically. By the way, she said you were elated about me joining the association. Was that so? I really couldn't tell at all. He looked at the ex-Princess Garcia in anticipation, as he wanted to see what kind of expression she would reveal. Would she deny everything completely or attempt to conceal herself hurriedly? No matter what she did, it should be very interesting. But he never imagined that she would portray a look of "you're really such a fool." What are you talking about? Said Garcia as she rolled her eyes. When you were on the platform, the master didn't speak at all. Do you think that I'm blind? Roland could not help but be stunned. This distance might be considered far for ordinary people, but I'm a martialist. I could even see clearly how many strands of beard you had on the stage. Don't try to lie to me. You're still too inexperienced, she said with a note of disdain. Didn't speak? Just as he was about to ask more questions, Lon had already reclosed the glass chest. She clapped her hands and made everyone focus their attention on the podium. This time round, there was much less talk in the hall. Our world isn't flat, it's a membrane. Some can understand this and others can't. But it doesn't matter. Just listen to me. She turned around so that the screen behind showed what was being said. The membrane has a curvature that, in popular terms, is like an arc, and in some places, this change is even more pronounced. If there are other worlds beyond this one, then there'll be a possibility that the two worlds will intersect, and this intersection is the erosion. Of course, this is only a speculation, but it's the only explanation for the vision that we saw. Since the erosion was discovered, all nations have kept up their research on it, but unfortunately the world there has completely different rules. Any means of detection are declared null and void, and even the matter here can't be stabilized beyond the borders. As you've seen for yourselves, the iron bar was the proof. Huh? What's the connection with the fallen evils? Someone asked. Of course there's a connection. The strength they gain comes from another membrane, and that's why the fallen evils aren't afraid of ordinary weapons in this world. The overlapping membrane temporarily connects the two worlds, and I don't know what kind of effect that would have on the other world. But for us, the rules still work. The movement of energy from high to low creates a series of phenomena that is incredible. Lon raised her voice and said, to be exact, not just the fallen evils, any awakened person would be related to this energy. What did you say? My power belongs only to me. It's not related to any goddamned membrane. Does the Martialist Association think that we're the same as the fallen evils? The hall suddenly burst into a commotion. This time Lon did not say anything to stop the commotion but waited until everyone became silent by themselves before she went on to say, of course there's a difference, we can control it, yet the fallen evils can't. But we have to admit that in some sense we're quite similar to the fallen evils, especially on this point about being able to resist injuries caused by ordinary weapons. Has everyone considered another point? How come the martialists can't dominate the entire world even when they can freely manipulate the force of nature and can't be hurt by ordinary weapons? Well, the crowd started to whisper. Because the erosion won't last forever, Lon said straightforwardly, as the curvature changes, the overlapping membranes will gradually separate until the next reunion. The cycle can be long or short. A short one could be a day while the long one could be millions of years. And we encountered the erosion about 2000 BC and the overlapping lasted only less than a century. Once they separated, the force of nature will disappear without any trace. Given that, even the awakened ones managed to dominate the whole world, 2000 years of interval would be enough for this empire to vanish. How can you be sure about what happened thousands of years ago? Although someone still questioned her theory, his attitude was much less aggressive. I don't know, said the chief disciple, frankly. It's just an assumption. Even 2000 years ago, there wasn't even a scientific way of observation and recording. If you want to validate it, we'll have to wait until 2000 years later. But we mustn't forget that history is always full of surprising coincidences. By comparing the biographies and history books of different regions, you'll find that many epic heroes and legends were born during that period, and then further on the myths emerged, and most myths were related to doomsday and the salvation. Can we assume that it was the erosion that caused this? There was a brief silence below the stage, and after a while, someone asked, and even if those epic heroes are the awakened ones of the force of nature, what does that have to do with us? According to what you said, the erosion will end by itself, so what's the purpose of the propaganda of your association against the erosion? Don't forget that apart from us, there are also the fallen evils, Lon answered quietly. This is what I said at the beginning. There's no evil force. The energy just spreads according to the rules. It has no malice, but that doesn't mean the affected people will also have no malice. We're just at the beginning of the membrane overlap, so such loopholes will continue to increase and expand. The fallen evils will also increase in numbers. And only the martialists that use the same kind of force can defeat them. This is a competition of the survival of the fittest, and only one party can survive. If we can't defeat the fallen evils, not just the awakened ones, but the whole human existence will be completely destroyed by them. Chapter 859, Two-Pronged Attack. Your Majesty. Your Majesty? Nightingale's voice woke Roland from his daze. The City Hall director is still waiting for your reply. Ah, I already know about this, said Roland as he blinked his eyes, trying to concentrate. He handed over the report in his hand to Berev and said, let's proceed according to what you said. Yes, said Berev. As he saluted Roland, he also solemnly added a sentence before leaving. Please take care of your health, Your Majesty. After the chief left the office, Roland asked Nightingale, does my face really look that bad? Well, you look okay, said the latter after some deliberation, it's just that you've been daydreaming more recently. Could this be related to the erosion of the dream world? Roland shook his head. The changes in dreamland can't really affect me. It's just a few strange things in retrospect that have been bothering me. There's nothing to worry about. That's good to know, said Nightingale while she pursed her lips. This was already the 4th day since he had left the dreamland. Although Faldi had succeeded in locating the headquarters of the association, Ling had failed to sneak into it. According to her, there had never been a place like that one. It was built underground, but it had been impossible for her to find any hiding spot there, and some shiny light band had covered her head. It had just kept glowing, no matter how long she had waited. Afterward, Ling had even despondently requested for Roland to punish her for failing her task, but naturally, Roland had refused to do so. The next play plan had been executed smoothly, and Roland had brought more tequila witches into his dreamland, but what he had seen and heard in the headquarters that day still troubled him immensely. The whole incident had so many strange factors that could not be explained. The first was the conclusion about the membrane world. He had always believed that the dream world would present a modern society filled with the force of nature in order to integrate both his and Zero's memories and keep his internal government self-consistent. In other words, no matter how many weird phenomena there were, they were all rules based on the needs of being self-consistent. Most of these rules came from his consciousness, which he understood and was able to accept. However, those words spoken by the chief disciple Lon completely exceeded the scope of his knowledge reserve. The only thing Roland knew about the membrane theory was that it evolved from the superstring theory. These two theories were particularly profound, and he had never carried out in-depth reading on them. Unlike quantum mechanics, he had at least read through 1 or 2 popular books about it. In the dream world, these theories should have been hidden as if they were invisible, just like those blank books that only had covers. However, both Land's explanation and the derivation formulas and evidence displayed in the lobby screens seemed to be logical. This was the first time he saw something totally unintelligible in the dreamland, as if a high school student had dreamed about the grand unification theory in physics, which was absurd and incredible. This even made him think that the dream world today was completely different from the world when he had first entered. As if something was growing wildly out of his sight. Another weird thing was the chief disciple herself. After Garcia had reminded Roland, he had recalled that the vision, hearing, and reaction of the martialists was better than ordinary people. If Lon had spoken to him on the stage, not only would the defenders, but even the first 2 rows of new people in the lobby have been able to hear something. But the fact was that no one at that time had shifted their attention to them. It had not sounded like a whisper to him, yet, surprisingly, it had not attracted any attention. At that time, he had not paid any attention to this point. But later on, when he thought about it, he questioned why a newcomer who was shown special attention by the chief disciple did not cause public concern. The things Lon said also left him scratching his head. Listen carefully to what I'm going to say next, as it might help you. How would the knowledge about the origin of the erosion, the relationship between the martialists and the fallen evils help him? Even if he wholeheartedly wanted to join the association and become a savior of the world, knowing these would still not be important to him, right? All these weird signs made Roland form some resistance toward the dream world. He intended to temporarily stop the connection with dreamland, once all the gods' punishment witches had gone in once to enjoy themselves. It would be better to behave cautiously whilst the battle of divine will was approaching. Your Majesty? Nightingale's voice once again could be heard, but this time with some urgency. You look like you're in a daze again. Ahem, I'm fine. Roland shook his head and threw his distractions behind him. It's just that I've got a little more things to consider lately and so I'm a little sleepy. But why do I feel that you're hiding something behind those words? Nightingale sat on the table, propped her feet up and said, Don't tell me that in the dream world, you and the witches. That's impossible. He suddenly felt dumbfounded. I just took them to experience the taste of different flavors only. Well, that's true. Nightingale blinked and revealed a cunning smile. I'm a bit worried about that world that I can't enter. There's no way to protect you at all times, and in case they suddenly make trouble, that would be problematic. After all, they've passed hundreds of years of unconscious days. And now that they've finally recovered their senses, I'm sure they would try to revisit all their past feelings. But that's more than 20 women. How could you cope if they all swarmed towards you? You're getting more ridiculous. Roland glared at her and said, Who did you get these ideas from? Can't you spend more energy on studying? Nightingale covered her mouth and said, I was just joking. If I had your ability, it'd surely remind me loudly that you were lying. Roland snorted and said, From the very beginning, you wanted to ask this, right? Well, I admit it. But this was not just my own opinion. Nightingale stuck her tongue out. I was also asked by someone else to raise this question. Asked by someone else? Roland did not have the time to ask who it was as there was knocking on the office door. He had to temporarily withdraw his questions and said, Come in. The door opened and a tall man quickly walked in, neatly closed his legs and then raised his hands to salute Roland. Your Majesty, Iron Axe is here to report to you. From Port of Clearwater to Neverwinter took almost 4 or 5 days, and by boat it was a rather laborious thing. But on the face of this foreign officer, he could not see a trace of exhaustion. His eyes reflected an energy that was full of war spirit. Fine, Roland nodded reassuringly. I think you already know about Neverwinter's combat plans? I've heard Brian talking about it, said Iron Axe. The First Corps will be divided into 2 roads from east and west to regain Grey Castle before crossing the border and striking Kingdom of Dawn's Glow City. But there's something that I don't understand. If you asked Brian to take over my task and stay in the Port of Clearwater to protect Miss Echo, who's responsible for the Eastern Front? It seems that even before the task had been assigned, Iron Axe had already placed the responsibility of leading the Western Front attack on his shoulders. Roland could not help but smile. Brian is still lacking in experience. Leading a garrison isn't a problem, but he could still be prone to accidents if he had to lead an entire army alone, so Eastern Front Army will be your responsibility. Iron Axe was slightly stunned and replied, Then what about the Western Front? I'll lead it personally, said Roland slowly. Chapter 860, Their Respective Journeys. When the last statistics report was handed over to him, the City Hall director finally let out a deep breath and waved his hand toward his subordinate. You can leave now. Yes, my lord. The latter bowed respectfully and closed the door of the office on his way out. The only person left in the room was Berev. He opened the drawer and removed more than a dozen forms from inside, flattened them on the table, and neatly stacked the newest one on top. As a result of this recent addition, all the necessary supplies for His Majesty's expedition were now fully prepared. Berev gently rubbed the paper, as if he were stroking a girl's tender, smooth skin. The rows of numbers seemed like a complex password to ordinary people, but in his eyes, it was a wonderful music score. It took only a week and a half for Neverwinter to complete a large-scale logistics transfer. Whether it was food or gold royals, they had surpassed the quantities of any previous expedition. Through his proposals and statistical tables, he could see ships carrying wheat flourishing from the inland river to the northern region. and he could hear the melodious sound of gold royals colliding with each other. He was unable to control this feeling of indulgence. If he wanted to name this score, power would undoubtedly be the most appropriate name. Now, the power lay in his hands, and he could play in any manner he wanted. After only 3 years, Neverwinter's prowess had reached an incredible level, not just in terms of military might, but also in all other aspects. When he had been an assistant to the treasurer in the old king's city, he had known a great deal about the financial situation of Grey Castle. And it was precisely because of that, he realized how amazing Roland Wimbledon was. Now Neverwinter's resources were probably equal to all the other cities' strength in Grey Castle combined. Unfortunately, no one could share this joy with him. Bear removed his monocle and glanced at the empty table opposite him. There was only one other person who could understand these figures and experience the joy that came with it, the Pearl of the Northern region. Sometimes he felt that the latter was the same type of person as he was. However, this regret dissolved very quickly. Compared to the option of possessing exclusive power, everything else paled in comparison. He stood up and walked to the window. He pulled out a peculiar coin from his breast pocket and flattened it in his palm. Engraved on the coin's surface was a mountain. It glittered in the late spring sun. This was the emblem of the Witch Cooperation Association. He had found this coin 3 years ago in the forest of the western region. He secretly retained it. He originally wanted to use it as evidence of the Lord colluding with witches in return for his own safety, when the church attacked the western region. But now, this emblem had become his lucky charm. His Majesty, who protects the witches, is evil? Of course not. The evil ones are those who were defeated by His Majesty. They had no strength, but they still acted arrogantly. This was the biggest crime, as even the demons in the barbarian land were not as bad as them. Fortunately, this situation would not last too long. Although His Majesty's plan to attack the Kingdom of Dawn was delayed by a little, he had already waited for 2 decades, so waiting for another year was not an issue at all. Grey Castle should be handed over to a more capable man. Bear knew that the day His Majesty unified the kingdom and was officially crowned as king, he himself would also climb to the pinnacle of power. He touched his beard and could not help but laugh. Today's test will stop here. Have you packed your luggage? Agatha asked while sorting out the experimental data. Tomorrow is the day of departure, so don't forget anything. I don't have many clothes and I don't need to carry any items. Isabella shook her head and replied calmly. Living in Neverwinter was much simpler than she had imagined. With the exception of repeatedly displaying the God Stone to allow the Ice Witch to observe the records, she controlled the rest of her time as long as she did not leave the diplomatic building. She was neither harassed nor humiliated. She had thought that the witches would have treated the pure witches very differently. However, sometimes she felt that Agatha's attitude toward her was the same as the other witches. There was hardly any difference. By the way, she said, and added another sentence, about what happened last time. Thank you for telling me. You mean the news about the church? Agatha shrugged. If it were me, I'd still think of going back and taking a look, whether it'd be a farewell or a break. But let's not talk about that now. You can't go on your journey like that. This is certainly due to my negligence, as I've just found out that you've been wearing the same thing all this time. She dropped the notebook and frowned as she walked over to Isabella. She grabbed Isabella's sleeve and felt it. It's gone all white, and it's winter clothing. When the weather turns hot, aren't you going to get overheated? That's nothing. Isabella wanted to say that she had been subjected to more rigorous training, but thought for a moment and decided to hold her tongue. This expedition isn't just a matter of a month or 2. Let's not mention the fact that you might not be able to wash your clothes daily on the road, and even your companions won't be able to stand it. Agatha said decisively, now that we still have time, I'll take you to the convenience market and we can pick a few pieces of clothing. When she heard the words companions, she became slightly surprised and hesitated for a moment before answering, but I've got no money. She was atoning for her misdeeds, and naturally, she would not get a monthly payment like the members of the Witch Union. Well, I do, said Agatha nonchalantly. You can think of it as a loan, she said. But it'll be after 5 years. 5 years is a short time compared to the tequila witches waiting for hundreds of years, isn't it? The ice witch interrupted by saying, the battle of divine will won't end that easily. You won't always remain like this unless this is what you want. She placed her hand out. So what are you hesitating about? Isabella did not answer. She suddenly felt that the sunset rays were a little dazzling. Through the golden rays, Agatha's body gradually faded away, and only her hand could be seen. Isabella lowered her head and took the latter's palm. At that moment, the sun seemed to be linked with her. Are you sure it'd be all right for me to come with you? Anna asked while she was lying in Roland's arms, blinking her lake blue eyes. As he had been busy settling the gods' punishment witches recently, it had been a long time before the two could spend some quiet time together. It was exactly for this reason, that even late at night, the two were still whispering, trying to catch up on all the words that they had missed during their absence. We've been preparing this for such a long time, and besides, it's all right to take a rest at times, said Roland, stroking her smooth back. Furthermore, this expedition isn't just for the sake of combat. Propaganda is also very important. For example, when socializing with everyone and attending banquets, it would be unacceptable if I weren't accompanied by a female companion. Anna nodded in agreement and buried her head shyly. Roland saw a touch of pink on her cheek due to the bright moonlight. It was clear that Anna was intelligent enough to understand the meaning of this remark. In formal occasions, appearing as a king's female companion was a statement. I said that one day, all the subjects of Grey Castle will know who you are, even if you are a witch, he said earnestly. Anna did not ask questions such as, is this really all right, or what if everyone opposes it? Instead, she replied in the same earnest tone, even if I'm a witch, I want to be with you, no matter what happens in the future. Roland lifted the corners of his mouth. This answer was really in her usual style. So we're both in agreement. The next day, the Neverwinter port was crowded with concrete boats that shipped the First Army and their war supplies. They were arranged neatly in a column before slowly leaving the Redwater River. At the front of the fleet was the Roland. At the top of the flagship, the symbol of the Grey Castle, a high tower and spear's flag, was waving in the wind and attracting everyone's attention. Everyone in Neverwinter knew that when their lord returned again, he would become the only king of the land. Someone shouted, "Long live the king," and the whole pier continued to shout out in unison. It sounded like thunder rolling over the sky, or the horn of departure. The war began in the midst of the lively voices of the people.